The year was 1878. The land was eastern Arizona, baked hard where the high desert clawed at the feet of the Mogollon Mountains. It was a place of sharp edges and long thirsts. A brutal dry season had held the territory for months, broken only by a wildfire that had scarred the lower ridges a week past. The air, even this high, still carried the sharp, resinous ghost of burnt pine down in the valley, invisible from the heights. Men were driving steel. The railroad was coming, pushing west, carving a line straight toward the lands the Apache held sacred. Taza, known sometimes as Red Hawk, watched the heat haze shimmer over the canyons. He stood on an outcrop overlooking the hidden cabin that was his only home. He was a man in his 30s, though the sun and a hard life had carved lines around his eyes that suggested more. He was built with the lean, efficient strength of the predators he hunted. His heritage was a story told in his features, the high, strong bones and copper skin of his Apache mother, mixed with the stubborn set of his jaw and the lighter, watchful eyes of his Scots-Irish father. He lived here, alone, in a cabin built of thick pine logs, tucked into a deep crease of the mountains so well that a rider could pass 100 yards away and see nothing but rock and juniper. His life was a deliberate rhythm, a circle of necessary things. This morning, he was replacing roof shingles warped and split by the relentless sun. His movements were precise, betraying no wasted energy. Yesterday, he had walked his trap lines, resetting snares for rabbits, his steps silent on the packed earth. Tomorrow, he would be inside, distilling herbs, the sharp, clean scents of sage, willow bark, and osha root would fill the small, dim space as he prepared his remedies. He was a mountain man, a guide when he chose to be, a hunter always. He read the earth, the sky, and the flight of birds the way other men read the Holy Bible or a thick ledger book. He had once read military maps. He had worn the blue coat and yellow bandana of an army scout. He understood their bugle calls, their marching formations, and the particular, casual way they lied, both to the tribes and to themselves. He had walked away from that life 4 years prior. He had walked away after witnessing too many councils where honorable words were spoken in the daytime, only to be invalidated by new orders that arrived in the night. Orders that spoke of removal and force. The injustice had settled deep inside him, a cold, heavy stone in his gut that no amount of time could dissolve. Now, he belonged nowhere. This isolation was his only armor. The Army command at Fort Verde suspected him of trading information, perhaps even guns, to the Apache bands. They saw him as a deserter, a half-breed who could not be trusted, and the Apache his mother's people. The older ones remembered him as a boy, but many of the younger, angrier warriors, pushed to the edge by the advancing settlements, saw him only as a man who had worn the enemy's code. He spoke English too well. He had guided soldiers. He was tainted. He existed in the space between, loyal only to the silent peaks and to his sister, Aiyana, a healer who kept the old ways in a small, protected camp deeper in the mountains, miles away. Though Taza could not know it, a different kind of survivor was moving toward him. Her name was Evelyn Hartley. Most called her Eve. She was barely into her 20s, a teacher who had come west full of ideals, hoping to bring literacy to the children at a small mission camp. Now, she was just running. Her body was failing, hollowed out by starvation. Her clothes, once respectable, were torn to rags by thorns and sharp rock. Her feet, wrapped in what remained of her petticoat, were bruised and bleeding. She was fleeing for her life, clutching one possession tightly against her ribs, shielding it with her own body even as she stumbled. It was a heavy leather ledger, its corners reinforced with brass. It was not a holy book. It was a book of sins. It held a secret, a precise accounting of bribes, false surveys, and stolen land. It held a truth so explosive it could burn Silas Pike's entire empire to the ground. She was running from the man whose name was written again and again in that ledger. Silas Pike. He was the great shadow over this part of the territory, a railroad baron and the owner of the burgeoning silver mine. Pike was a man who saw the world as a resource to be consumed. He was a pillar of progress in the eastern newspapers, a titan of industry. But in the canyons and valleys of Arizona, he was a thief. He operated through force, and his fist was a man named Bram Kincaid. Kincaid ran a private outfit, Pinkertons by reputation if not by official name, a collection of hard men with cold eyes and quick trigger fingers. They were Pike's private army, tasked with clearing the Apache from the land Pike coveted, using starvation, intimidation, or bullets. They were the men hunting Evelyn. Taza finished hammering the last wooden peg into the shingle. He wiped the sweat from his brow with his forearm, leaving a streak of grime. He stood, his senses reaching out, tasting the air. The world was quiet, but it was a loaded quiet. He heard the dry rasp of the wind moving through the surviving pines. He heard the distant, territorial cry of a wolf, a thin sound in the vast, hot emptiness. This was his isolation, the wind, the rock, the smell of dust. Then, far below, on a dusty mesa that stretched flat toward the valley, a line of motion caught his eye. It was the Mustangs, a band of them, maybe 20 strong, led by a powerful blue roan stallion. Their coats were the color of gunmetal and twilight storm clouds. They moved as one, a fluid, breathing expression of wild freedom. They were the true spirit of this land, untamed, unbound. Taza watched them until they flowed over the horizon, a disappearing ribbon of grace. They represented everything he valued, and everything Silas Pike's railroad threatened to destroy. This was the heart of the conflict. It was not just about steel tracks or silver ore. It was about freedom and dignity. It was about who had the right to call a place home. It was about families found and families broken, about loyalties tested and betrayals that cut deeper than any knife. The very air was thick with these questions, coiled and waiting in the oppressive heat. The pace of life in the high desert was slow, measured by the sun and the moon. Taza moved with it. He respected its power. He gathered his hammer and pegs, his movements economical, silent. He was a man of profound, practiced observation. He noticed the smallest things. A broken branch on a game trail that meant a deer had passed recently. The specific print of a female coyote. The way the hawk circled when the air pressure dropped, long before the clouds gathered. He stopped, halfway to his cabin door. His head tilted, his entire body going still. His gaze fixed on a spot far to the south, lower down the slope, near the edge of the burn scar. It was smoke. It was not the thick, efficient smoke of an Apache signal fire. It was not the steady, organized plume of a soldier camp or a survey crew. This was a thin, desperate wisp. It was pale gray against the dark rock, rising weakly, clinging to the ground. It was the smoke of a single person, someone small and lost, likely injured. Someone trying to fight the desperate cold that flooded these mountains the moment the sun vanished behind the rim. Taza felt the familiar tightening in his gut, the same internal shift he felt just before a lightning storm broke over the peaks. The dust of the outside world, the metallic rattle of boots on gravel, the scent of fear. It was all coming to his door. The long, silent peace was over. Taza did not go to the smoke. He was not a savior, and he was not a fool. To walk toward a stranger's fire in this territory was to walk toward a bullet. He stayed in the high rocks, watching, as the sun's remaining light bled out of the sky, turning the peaks from red gold to a deep, cold purple. The wisp of smoke vanished, eaten by the twilight. Whoever was down there was either gone, or they were freezing. The high desert cold did not wait for midnight. It fell like an axe the moment the sun was gone. The wind began to howl, a thin, icy sound that carried the promise of frost. He was inside his cabin, securing the heavy wooden bar across the door. When he heard the sound, it was not the wind, and it was not an animal. It was a scrape, a heavy, dragging sound. followed by the dull thud of a body colliding with the woodpile stacked beside his wall. A low moan, barely human, was stolen by the wind. His rifle was in his hands before he had taken a full breath. He moved to the door, his steps silent on the packed earth floor. He lifted the bar, easing the heavy plank of wood out of its brackets. He pulled the thick door inward just enough to see. She was there, collapsed on his doorstep, a dark heap against the pale, frozen ground. He saw the matted hair, the bundle of rags. She was trying to push herself up with one arm, a desperate, failing effort. She was alone, starving, and at the very end of her strength. He lowered the rifle. He knelt in the doorway, the wind tearing at his shirt. He slid one strong arm beneath her back and the other under her knees. She weighed nothing. He thought of a starved fawn, all hollow bones and icy fear. He lifted her. She gave a small, sighing sound, and her head fell against his chest. He carried her inside, into the immediate smoky warmth of the cabin, and kicked the door shut with his boot, dropping the bar back into place. He carried her to his cot, a simple frame built against the wall, piled high with thick buffalo hides and woven blankets. He laid her down gently. In the flickering light of his hearth fire, he saw her face clearly for the first time. She was young, maybe just 20. Her face was gaunt, the skin stretched tight over her cheekbones, her lips cracked and faintly blue. She was shivering so violently the simple cot frame rattled. For a long moment, Taza just stood there, looking at what the wind had brought him. This was the world he had shut out. It had found him. A strange, unfamiliar ache tightened his chest. He did not know why he said the words. Perhaps he was saying them only to the silent, watching shadows of the cabin, or to the memory of his own long loneliness. His voice was a low whisper, rough with disuse. "You're home now." The woman, Evelyn, did not hear him. She was lost in a cold, dark place. He covered her with 2 more thick hides, then turned to the fire. A heavy iron pot always hung there, holding the remnants of his last meal. He added water from the wooden bucket, a handful of dried beans, and another of parched corn from his winter stores. He took his knife, cut thick strips of dried venison from a rack overhead, and dropped them into the pot. He stirred the stew with a long wooden spoon, pushing the pot closer to the flames. Soon, a rich, savory steam began to fill the small room, cutting through the smells of pine, leather, and wood smoke. He ladled the thickest part of the broth into a tin cup. He went back to the cot. He brushed the matted hair from her face and gently lifted her head. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. They were wide, blue, and utterly terrified. She did not see him. She saw only a shape, a threat. "Easy," he said. His voice was steady, calm. "You are safe. Drink this." He put the rim of the cup to her lips, but she was too weak, choking as the hot liquid spilled down her chin. He set the cup aside. He found a spoon, dipped it into the broth, and blew on it carefully. He brought it to her mouth, touching her lower lip. "Eat," he commanded, not unkindly. Her body obeyed, though her mind was still far away. She swallowed. He gave her another spoonful, and another. He fed her slowly, methodically, watching as the smallest bit of color returned to her face. The violent shivering eased into a steady trembling. Finally, her eyes slid closed again, and her breathing deepened. This time, it was not the edge of death. It was true sleep. He stood back, analyzing the situation. This was trouble, deep trouble. He looked at her clothes again. The dark wool of her skirt was torn to ribbons by thorns and rock, but it was good wool, finely woven. This was not a settler woman. This was someone from a town, someone with money, or who had been around it. She was clutching something under her jacket. Her arm locked tight against her ribs, even in her deep sleep. He worried it was a broken rib, that his lifting her had harmed her. He gently worked his fingers under her arm, trying to feel for the injury. His hand brushed against not bone, but hard leather. It was a book, a large, brass-cornered ledger. He tried to ease it from her grip, just to see if she was wounded beneath it. Her eyes flew open. She moved so fast it startled him. She scrambled backward on the cot until her back hit the cold log wall, pulling the heavy book to her chest like a shield. She made a raw, panicked sound, half sob, half warning. "No," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp.
"Do not, please, do not let them see it."
"Let who see it?" Taza asked. He kept his hands open, visible. He did not move closer. "Them," she breathed. She stared at him, her eyes wild, tracking his every move. She was a cornered wolf, ready to fight despite having no strength left. Taza held her gaze for a second, then gave a slow nod. He left her. He pulled on his heavy winter coat, grabbed his rifle, and slipped back out into the night, closing the door silently behind him. The wind hit him like a physical blow. The moon was high now, casting sharp, black shadows. He did not look for her tracks. She had left almost none. He moved down the slope to the dry creek bed, the most logical path up to his hidden ridge. The ground there was sandy gravel, sheltered from the worst of the wind. The signs were there, sharp and clear in the moonlight. Hoof prints, at least 3, maybe 4 horses. They were shod. These were not Apache ponies. And mixed with them were boot tracks, men on foot. They wore military-style heels, the prints deep and confident. They knew how to track. He followed the trail for 100 yards. It moved up the creek, then fanned out. The men sweeping the base of the ridge. They had lost her trail in the rocks, but they knew she was close. They were casting a net. He knew these tracks. He had seen them before. Down near the mining camps. Bram Kincaid's men. They were no longer just searching. They were closing the circle. He returned to the cabin. His face was a mask of cold stone. Evelyn was sitting up, the hides clutched to her chin. She watched him, her fear a palpable thing in the small room. He said nothing to her. He moved to the fire, adding 2 more logs, his movements deliberate. He was calculating. He had maybe half a day, perhaps less, as if summoned by his grim thoughts. A soft scratching sound came from the high, narrow window slit. He left open for ventilation. A small, gray bird darted through the opening and landed on a familiar rafter overhead. It was his sister's bird, a trained messenger. Taza held out his forearm. The bird hopped down, landing on his leather wrist guard. A tiny, rolled piece of birch bark was tied to its leg with a strand of sinew. He untied it, his fingers surprisingly gentle. He unrolled the bark. It was marked with the quick, symbolic charcoal strokes of his people. The news was bad. A runner had come to Ayana's camp. Silas Pike had his victory. A judge in Tucson, a man Pike owned, had signed the land grant. The treaty was paper. The railroad was claiming Crow's Pass. The message was clear. A test train, loaded with surveyors, soldiers, and railroad officials, was scheduled to run the new tracks in 10 days. 10 days. The steel snake was coming to the heart of the valley. Taza crushed the bark in his fist. His own quiet war had just found a deadline. He looked at the woman on his cot, a white schoolteacher. He knew the type, or he thought he did. They came west with Bibles and books, full of high ideals that shattered the first time they faced a hard winter or a hard man. She was a complication, a piece of the outside world he had sworn to avoid. Getting involved in her trouble, whatever it was, meant painting a target on his back. The army already distrusted him. Kincaid's men would shoot him on sight. Evelyn watched him. She saw the change in his face as he read the message from the bird. She saw the hard set of his jaw, the cold fire in his eyes. He moved with a silent, contained power. He had the rifle, the knife, the look of a man who lived by them. He looked exactly like the army scouts she had seen at the mission. Hard, untrustworthy men who moved between worlds, loyal only to coin. She was terrified that he was one of them, a man who would see the price on her head and trade her for it. "You cannot stay here," he said, his voice flat. It was final.
I know,
she whispered. The soup had given her voice back, though it was still weak. "I will leave. In the morning. I just needed a moment." "You will have one night," he said, turning from the fire. "One more meal in the morning. Then you go."
Thank you,
she said, nodding, her eyes dropping to the ledger in her lap. It was a bargain, a fragile truce spoken into the flickering shadows. And they both knew it was a lie. She was in no condition to walk 10 feet, let alone escape a crew of armed trackers. And he knew, with a sinking certainty, that sending her out into the cold was no different from putting his own rifle to her head. The silence in the cabin stretched, heavy and cold. The only sounds were the crackle of the logs and the high, lonely scream of the wind outside. Evelyn's gaze drifted around the small, spare room. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters. Furs were stacked neatly in a corner. It was a place of purpose, with nothing wasted. Her eyes stopped on a small object hanging from a wooden peg near his cot. It was a single, perfect feather from a red-tailed hawk, its base tied with sinew to a smooth, blue-green piece of turquoise.
What is that?
She asked, her voice barely audible. Taza looked where she was pointing. He rarely noticed it anymore.
A feather. Why do you keep it?
She pressed, her curiosity a small, human spark in her starved face. He paused. He did not speak of such things, but her question was direct, without guile. "It is from the Red Hawk," he said, his voice low. "My namesake. My mother gave it to me when I was a boy." "What does it mean?" Taza turned, looking at her fully. The raw fear in her eyes had been replaced by a deep, profound weariness, but also by that spark of curiosity. "It means," he said slowly, "freedom, the freedom to fly high enough to see through the storm." Evelyn held his gaze. Her own eyes were like a stormy sky. She looked down at the blood-stained ledger in her lap, her knuckles white. Freedom to see through the storm. A sound split the night, sharp and clear over the wind. "Ho, ho, ho!" In an instant, Taza was a different man. He moved without thinking, kicking the embers of the fire apart with his boot, scattering them across the hearthstones. The cabin was plunged into near darkness, lit only by the faint orange glow of the dying coals. He was at the door, his rifle in his hand.
What is it?
Evelyn whispered, her voice shaking with new fear. "An owl," he said, his voice a low growl, his ear pressed to the door. "Ho, ho, ho." It came again, closer this time, from the ridge just above the cabin.
They are talking to each other?
Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth.
I have heard it before. At the mission. That is them?
Taza nodded once, his body tense. It was Kincaid's signal. He was sure of it. They had found her trail. They were organized, and they were close. They were no longer just searching. They were hunting. The time for deliberation, for bargains, for waiting until morning was over. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. It was on his door. The owl call hung in the absolute cold. A deliberate, unnatural signal. Taza did not move, did not even breathe. He listened, his ear pressed to the heavy wood of the door. Evelyn watched him, her knuckles white where she gripped the ledger. The terror that had subsided was back, sharp and acidic in her throat. "They are on the ridge," Taza said, his voice a low rumble, barely louder than the wind. He moved away from the door, his motion fluid, pulling his heavy buffalo hide coat from its peg. They will wait for first light. They think they have you trapped.
How do you know?
She whispered, her teeth chattering. It was not just from the cold. That is how I would hunt, he said. He tossed a smaller hide, a heavy wolf pelt, toward the cot. Put that on. We are leaving. Evelyn fumbled with the fur, her fingers numb. Leaving where they are out there. They are out there, he agreed. He checked the load in his rifle, his actions economical and precise. Which is why we are not going down. We are going up, over the high pass. He stopped, his gaze settling on the book she held. That is what they want. Is it not? It was not a question. She hesitated. The cabin was a trap, but this man was still a stranger. He was a hard man, an Apache scout by the look of him, and she had seen what those men would do for money. They will kill you for it, he said, not looking at her, busy stuffing a strip of dried venison and a handful of parched corn into a leather pouch. And they will kill me for being here when they find you. She had no choice. She had run until her body had quit, and the world had delivered her to this single smoky room. She had to trust him, or she would die at dawn.
Yes,
she said, her voice a dry rasp.
It is what they want.
She watched him move.
Your people are Apache.
He nodded once.
Then you must see, she said.
She pushed the hides off her legs and slid to the edge of the cot. The room was dark, the fire kicked apart, but a few embers still glowed like angry red eyes. Taza struck a match against his belt buckle and lit a single tallow candle. The small, flickering light threw huge, dancing shadows across the log walls. Evelyn opened the heavy leather cover. The ledger was not filled with mission supplies or sermon notes. It was filled with neat, tight columns of script, with dates, names, and figures. She turned the pages, her fingers weak, until she found the one she was looking for. Here, she said. Taza moved closer. He held the candle over the page. It was a map, drawn with a precise, steady hand. Taza knew this land better than his own skin. He recognized the contours instantly. It was Crow's Pass. It was the sacred valley, the place of the ancestors. But the map showed something new. It showed a thin, straight line, a spur line, cutting directly through the valley, past the ancient burial grounds, ending at a spot marked with a star and two words Silver Lode. A cold, quiet fury began to build in Taza's chest. He had known about the railroad. But this was a violation. This was not progress, it was greed, driving steel straight into the heart of his mother's people. Evelyn's finger, thin and bruised, moved from the map to the columns beside it. These are the payments, she said. Taza read the names. Judge Rutherford, the Indian agent from the San Carlos Reservation, a United States Army Supply Sergeant at Fort Verde, and next to each name, a number, $50, $100, payments for surveys, for favorable reports, for looking the other way. His eyes scanned down the page until Evelyn's finger stopped him again. She pointed to a line item, relocation expenses Apache. Beneath it was a list, ammunition, 300 rounds, wagon repairs, feed for horses, and a final entry, guide fees. B. Kincaid. Taza looked at her.
This is a budget for a massacre,
he said, his voice flat.
They call it clearing the territory,
she whispered. She turned the page. At the bottom, securing the entire illegal enterprise, were two signatures. The first was flowery and official, pressed deep into the paper with the embossed seal of a territorial judge. The second was sharp, angular, and impatient Silas Pike. The entire betrayal, the reason the land was burning, was laid bare in ink and paper in his own cabin. "Why you?" he asked, his voice hard. "Where did you get this?" Evelyn looked down, a wave of shame and sickness rolling through her. "I was a teacher at the mission camp, north of here. I came west. I wanted to teach. I wanted to help." Her voice broke, but she forced it steady.
I taught the children, the Apache children. I saw what was happening.
She described it in short, clipped sentences. The children, bright and quick, being punished for speaking their own language. She told of the day the soldiers came, taking the older boys, tying them together, and marching them away to the new boarding school in the east. She had seen their mothers weeping, one woman trying to fight the soldiers, only to be struck down with a rifle butt.
Silas Pike,
she said, the name tasting like ash.
He funded the mission. He visited often. He said it was his Christian duty. He needed someone
educated to help him write reports, propaganda. She had been forced to write pamphlets describing the glorious future the railroad would bring, the civilization it offered. She worked in his field office, and he grew careless. He left his private ledger open. She began to see that the words she was writing were a beautiful lie to cover the ugly truth in his book.
So I copied it,
she said, her voice gaining a thin thread of steel.
At night, for a month, I copied every page, every name, every number.
She tapped the ledger in her lap.
This is the copy. He does not know I have it.
He knows you have something, Taza said, or Kincaid would not be hunting you. His overseer caught me. I ran. Pike could not accuse me of copying his book, so he accused me of stealing. She met his gaze, her own eyes bright with fever or unshed tears. He said I stole $200. There is a bounty on my head. $200 for anyone who brings me to Bram Kincaid, alive. Taza understood. It was not a reward. It was a purchase price. $200 to buy her silence, to buy her body and the book she carried, and make them both disappear. He turned away from her, his mind racing. This changed everything. This was not a stray, starving woman. This was a weapon. She held the proof that could stop Pike, that could expose the corruption from the judge to the army. But using that weapon, it meant war. His life here was a careful balance. He was alone, trusted by no one, but also left alone. To help her, to be seen with her, was to choose a side. It meant facing Kincaid's rifles, Pike's money, and the army's prisons. It was suicide. But to do nothing? To send her back out into the cold, to let Kincaid find her. It meant the ledger would be burned. It meant the valley would be lost. It meant the graves of his ancestors would be torn apart for silver. It meant the children she spoke of would be stolen and broken. It would be a betrayal of his blood, his land, and the last shred of honor he had left. He walked to the narrow window slit, pushing aside the hide covering. The wind was easing. The first pale, sickly gray light of dawn was staining the eastern sky. The ridges were black shapes against the growing light. And then he saw them. On the crest of the highest, farthest ridge, black silhouettes against the coming day. The Mustangs. The blue roan stallion was at their head, his shape unmistakable. They were not running. They were moving with purpose, flowing over the rock, a dark river of life. The stallion led, and they followed, secure in his strength, his knowledge of the paths. Taza watched them until they disappeared over the summit. He heard the old Apache teaching, his mother's voice, whispering in his memory. Freedom is not a wild, senseless thing. It must be guided. It cannot be tamed, but it must be led. It cannot be chained. His path was clear. He could not let this woman, or the truth she carried, be chained and broken. He would guide them. He turned back into the room. His indecision was gone. His eyes were clear and hard as the turquoise at his throat. We leave, now. We go to my sister's camp, Ayana. She is a healer, 2 valleys over. They will not look for us there, not at first. She will tend to you. We will decide what to do with the book from there. Evelyn watched him. He was packing his few vital supplies, his ammunition pouch, the water skin, his long knife. He turned his back to her to check the supplies on a high shelf. In that second, Evelyn's hand, driven by an instinct she thought was dead, slid under the thin pillow of the cot, Her fingers closed around the cold, wooden handle of his skinning knife. She must have taken it in her delirium when he first laid her down. A last, desperate, animal instinct to arm herself. He turned back. He saw her. He saw the knife in her hand, held between them. He did not move. He just watched her, his face impassive. Evelyn looked at the weapon. She looked at the man who had brought her in from the cold, who had fed her, who had listened, and who was now risking his life for her. His eyes were not the eyes of the men at the mission. They were not cruel, or greedy, or dead. They were alive. They were watchful. And right now, they were waiting. Her grip on the handle loosened. Slowly, deliberately, she turned the knife in her hand, extending it to him, hilt first.
"I believe,"
she said, her voice shaking but clear.
"this belongs to you."
Taza took it. His fingers brushed hers. The brief touch was warm against the icy cold of the room. He did not look at the knife. He slid it back into the sheath at his belt. His eyes held hers. He then reached down to the ledger in her lap. He gently closed the cover. He pushed it back toward her. "Guard it," he said. It was the only acceptance he offered. It was the only one she needed. The bargain was sealed. "We need to buy time," he said, his voice quick and low. "Bar the door behind me. Do not open it for any sound except 3 quick knocks, like this." He rapped his knuckles against the log wall. "Rap, rap, rap!" She nodded, her fear replaced by a sharp, cold focus. He grabbed a bundle of dry sage and a small pot of pine pitch from his shelf. He slipped not out the door, but through a heavy hide curtain in the back corner. Behind it, a narrow fissure in the rock led up and out, an exit no one would see from the front. He moved up the rock face behind the cabin, silent as the shadows. He found what he was looking for, a dead, dry pine, standing alone, downwind from his true path. He jammed the pitch and sage into a hollow in its trunk. He had brought a few glowing coals from the hearth in a small clay pot. He poured them into the hollow. The dry wood smoldered, then caught, a thin line of smoke rising. It would take time, but it would burn. He slid back down the rock, brushed away his tracks, and returned to the hidden opening. Rap, rap, rap. Evelyn pulled the bar back, and he pushed the hide aside, grabbing her arm. "Come, step only where I step." He pulled her out into the freezing pre-dawn air. He led her up the rock face, away from the trail, moving toward the high, treacherous pass. As they climbed, he used a pine bough to sweep the rock behind them, erasing what little sign they left. They disappeared into the deep shadows of the peaks just as the first true rays of sunlight hit the valley floor below. An hour later, Bram Kincaid kicked the front door of the cabin off its leather hinges. It crashed to the floor. He entered, his rifle raised, his 4 men fanning out behind him. The cabin was empty. One of his men swore, then pointed. "Look, smoke, to the west." Kincaid glanced at it, then ignored it. He walked to the hearth. He knelt, holding his bare hand over the scattered ashes. A faint warmth still radiated from the stones. "He was here," Kincaid said, his voice a gravelly rasp. He stood and walked to the cot. He saw the indentation in the furs. He saw the tin cup, stained with the grease of the soup. The half-breed, he fed her. He knew Taza. He knew his reputation, a man who lived between worlds. Kincaid walked back outside, a cold, thin smile twisting his lips. He looked past the decoy smoke. He looked up toward the high, frozen peaks, the direction Taza would never be foolish enough to take a half-starved woman, the direction of the sacred valley. "He thinks he is clever," Kincaid said to his men. "He is running her to his sister. He is heading for Crow's Pass." He spat on the ground. "Let him! We will meet them there!" The world was made of broken rock and burning sky. Taza set a relentless pace, not up toward the snowy peaks, but across the grain of the mountains, through a series of steep, wooded ravines and narrow game trails. He knew Evelyn was weak, but he also knew Kincaid would be moving fast. He gave her no rest, only a few sips of water from his skin and a small piece of dried venison to chew as they walked. He moved in a half-crouch, his rifle ready, reading the land. She followed in his exact footsteps, the heavy ledger in a pouch slung across her chest, the wolf pelt clutched around her. He pushed her for hours, until the sun was high and brutal, and she was moving on pure, numb terror. Her legs were liquid, her lungs on fire. She was breathing in sobs. Finally, he stopped, holding up a hand. He motioned for her to hide in a thicket of scrub oak. She collapsed behind it, her body shaking, not from cold, but from utter exhaustion. He returned a minute later. "We are high enough. The trail is cold." He pulled her to her feet. They climbed another hour, this time on a path that was little more than a goat track. It opened onto a high, wind-swept ridge, and here the world changed. The sun was still bright, but the air was knife-thin and bitingly cold. In the shadows on the north side of the pass, the ground was white. "Snow," Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking. It was late in the season for it to hold this long. "A late storm," Taza said. "It stays in the high shadows." The patch was perhaps 50 yards across, filling a deep, natural saddle in the rock. It was old snow, packed hard and slick as glass. "We must cross," he said. "The camp is on the other side." He went first, his moccasins finding purchase on the few bare rocks. He reached back for her. "Slow. Step where I do." Evelyn put her foot where he had. It slipped. Her other foot shot out, and suddenly her feet were gone from under her. She gave a short, sharp cry as she fell backward, sliding toward the steep, rocky drop-off they had just climbed. Taza moved in a blur. He did not grab for her hand. He lunged, planting his feet, and caught her entire body against his chest. His left arm wrapped around her waist like a steel band, crushing the air from her lungs. His other hand cupped the back of her head, protecting her from the impact as his own back hit the rocky wall of the pass. The world stopped. There was only the high, thin shriek of the wind. Evelyn was pressed so tightly against him she could not breathe. Her face was buried in the rough wool of his coat, which smelled of pine smoke, leather, and the clean, sharp scent of the man himself. She could feel the solid, steady, powerful beat of his heart against her cheek. It was the calmest, strongest sound she had ever heard. He was a wall of heat and muscle, a living fortress against the wind, the cold, and the men who were hunting her. She was, in that single, terrifying second, completely safe. He held her for a long moment, his body shielding hers from the icy wind. He could feel the desperate, rabbit-fast pulse in her throat, the fragility of her bones beneath the wolf pelt. A fierce, protective instinct, deeper and more potent than simple duty, surged through him. It was a feeling he had not allowed himself to have for a very long time. Then, just as quickly, he let it go. He loosened his grip. "I have you," he said, his voice rough. He set her back on her feet, one hand still firmly on her arm, holding her steady. He did not look at her. "Stay behind me. Do not slip." He got her across the pass, his grip never leaving her arm. They descended into a new valley, this one greener, more sheltered. A thin ribbon of clear water ran through it, tucked against a sheer cliff face. Hidden by a stand of ancient, towering cottonwoods was a small settlement. It was not a camp of teepees. It was 3 solid log structures, smaller than Taza's cabin, with neat garden plots beside them and a sturdy horse corral. Smoke rose from a central fire pit, where a woman was grinding corn with a stone mano and metate. As they approached, the woman looked up. She was perhaps Taza's age, with the same strong bones and copper skin, but her eyes were softer, though they held a deep, settled sadness. She wore a simple buckskin dress, her dark hair tied back in two neat braids. She saw Taza, and a slow, beautiful smile lit her face. Then she saw Evelyn, and the smile vanished, replaced by a look of sharp, cautious intelligence.
"Ayana,"
Taza said. He walked to his sister and touched her shoulder. It was a gesture of deep, quiet affection.
"She needs you."
Ayana stood, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gaze swept over Evelyn, taking in the starved face, the torn clothes, the terror still clinging to her. She looked at the ledger slung across Evelyn's chest. She looked back at her brother. A silent conversation passed between them.
"Bring her inside,"
Ayana said, her voice calm and melodic. She led Evelyn into the largest cabin, which was spotlessly clean and smelled of herbs. Furs and woven blankets were piled neatly. Ayana gestured to a stool by the warm hearth. "Sit." She examined Evelyn with a healer's gentle, practiced touch. She looked at her bruised feet, her scraped hands, the dark circles under her eyes. She asked no questions. "You are half-starved," Ayana said simply. "And you have walked your feet raw. You will heal, but first you must be clean." She spoke to Taza in the Apache tongue, her voice too fast for Evelyn to understand. He nodded and left. Ayana busied herself at the hearth, heating a large pot of water, adding handfuls of dried herbs from bundles hanging on the wall. The air filled with the sharp, clean scents of juniper, rosemary, and willow bark. She poured the steaming, fragrant water into a wooden tub in a small, private alcove.
"The water is hot,"
Ayana said, gesturing. "The clothes on the stool are clean. Leave yours. I will burn them." Evelyn hesitated, clutching the ledger. Ayana's dark, knowing eyes softened. "No one will enter. Your book will be safe." Evelyn, for the first time in days, was alone. She slipped the thong of the ledger over her head and set it carefully on a dry stool. She undressed, her body aching, and stepped into the tub. The heat was a shock, a painful, exquisite relief. She sank down, the herbal steam rising around her. She scrubbed away the days of grime, fear, and running. The water turned dark. She washed her hair, her hands shaking with the effort. When she was finished, she felt scoured clean, fragile, and more human than she had in a week. She dried herself and put on the clothes Ayana had left, a soft deerskin shirt that was far too large and a simple woven skirt. She came out of the alcove, her wet hair wrapped in a cloth. Ayana handed her a bowl of hot, thick stew. It was rabbit and corn. Evelyn ate, her body crying out for the nourishment. When she was done, Taza entered the cabin. He had been speaking with a young Apache runner who had just arrived, his pony lathered. Taza's face was grim. "The news is not good," he said, speaking to both of them. "The railroad has sent an armed survey team. They are at the mouth of the valley now. They will begin measuring the land for the new spur line in 72 hours. 3 days. Evelyn felt the small, warm hope from the bath turn to ice. "They cannot." The ledger.
"A book does not stop bullets," Taza said. "Not yet."
"What do we do?" Ayana asked, her hands still. "We use their own laws against them." Taza said, "There is a man in Copper Bend, Reverend Jonas. He has spoken out against Pike before. Wrote a letter to the territorial paper about the water rights Pike stole."
"A white preacher,"
Ayana said, her voice flat, unimpressed.
"He is a start,"
Taza insisted. "Plan A. We ride to Copper Bend. We give the ledger to Jonas. He knows who to send it to, how to make it official."
"And if this preacher has been bought?"
Ayana asked, her eyes sharp, like all the others. "Then Plan B," Taza said, his voice hardening. "The railroad is running supplies to a temporary station. There will be workers, townspeople. If Jonas is compromised, we show the book to all of them. We create a scandal so loud even Pike's money cannot silence it." A shadow fell across the doorway. A young man stood there, tall and lean, his face painted with 2 black stripes of anger. He carried a Winchester rifle and his eyes, fixed on Taza, were hot. "The white soldiers are in our valley," the warrior, Gray Wolf, said in Apache, "and you bring another white skin to our camp." "She is not with them," Taza replied in the same language. "She carries a weapon that can help us." "The only weapon is this," Gray Wolf said, slapping the stock of his rifle. "We should ambush them. Send their bloody scalps back to this pike. It is the only message they understand." "And what then?" Taza shot back, his voice rising. "You kill 10. They send 100. They will send the army. They will call it a massacre. And they will hunt our women and children. And they will be right. Pike wants you to fight. He is waiting for it. It is the excuse he needs to wipe us from this land forever." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, intense growl. "We have a chance to cut the snake's head off in their own village, using their own laws. We fight with the truth. We save our people. We save our valley. That is the warrior's path, not this hot-blooded foolishness." Gray Wolf stared at him, his hand tight on his rifle. Ayanna stepped between them. "Taza is right," she said, her voice quiet but full of authority. "His way is harder, but it is the only one that leads to tomorrow." The young warrior spat on the ground, but the fire in his eyes dimmed. He gave Evelyn a look of pure hatred, then turned and stalked away. "He will not move against you," Ayanna said, "but he will be watching." Taza nodded. "We ride for Copper Bend at dawn. Eve, you must be strong enough." Evelyn, who had understood nothing of the exchange but everything of the danger, nodded. "I will be." The next day, she found her strength returning. Ayanna gave her tough, beaded moccasins that fit her feet perfectly. Taza had 2 ponies, small, tough, Apache horses. He watched her try to mount. "No," he said. He had no saddle. "Not like that." He showed her how to mount in one fluid motion. He stood beside her, his hand on her waist, guiding her. "You do not sit on him. You sit with him. Grip with your knees. Feel his heart. Breathe when he breathes. You will be one." She was clumsy, but she listened. She felt the horse's muscles, the rhythm of his walk. For the first time, she was not just a passenger. She was a rider. That night, they sat by Ayanna's fire. The camp was quiet, the tension thick. Evelyn saw Taza trying to read a piece of paper, a wanted poster he had taken from the runner. It had his own likeness, drawn badly, on it. He was studying the letters, his brow furrowed in frustration. She realized, with a small jolt, that he could not read, not words. She found a piece of charcoal and a clean, smooth piece of birch bark. She knelt beside him. "Let me show you." She dipped the charcoal in a cup of water. Making a crude ink, she wrote her own name, her hand steady, "Evelyn." "That is me," she whispered. He watched her, his expression unreadable. Then she wrote his name, Taza. He took the charcoal from her, his large, calloused hand. The hand that could set a snare or aim a rifle was surprisingly careful. He slowly, painstakingly traced the letters. He looked at the mark, then at her. He said nothing, but a connection, a quiet understanding, passed between them. Later, they sat side by side, their shoulders almost touching, watching the flames. Ayanna hummed a low, sad song as she mended a blanket. "You told me you're home now," Evelyn whispered, so low only he could hear. "When you found me at your cabin, why did you say that?" He stared into the fire, his profile hard and beautiful in the flickering light. "It was just a word. It meant nothing." "It felt like it meant something," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. He turned his head, his dark eyes locking on hers. The firelight danced in their depths. "Home is not a place," he said, his voice a low rumble.
Not a cabin of logs or a fire. It is a place where a promise is kept, a place where the truth is safe. His gaze was so intense it was like a physical touch. Their shoulders brushed. The small space between them was electric, full of the things they could not say. He looked at her mouth, and she saw the question in his eyes. She felt her own breath catch, her body leaning toward him. An invitation. The world narrowed to the sound of the fire and the man beside her. Ayanna cleared her throat, a small, polite sound. The spell was broken. Taza stood abruptly, his face closing, becoming the scout once more. "We sleep," he said, his voice harsh. "We ride hard at dawn." The next morning, as Taza scouted the trail ahead, he moved out 1/2 mile from the camp. He was silent, his senses alert. Under a large ponderosa pine, something glinted in the morning sun. He knelt. It was a brass bullet casing, a Winchester .44. It was new, the metal still bright. He picked it up and rubbed it between his fingers. It was still faintly oily, and he could smell the sharp tang of recently burned powder. Kincaid had not been fooled by the decoy fire. He had not wasted time at the cabin. He was behind them, and he was close. Taza returned to the camp, his face a grim, cold mask. As Evelyn and Taza mounted their ponies, Ayanna came to Evelyn's side. She took Evelyn's hand and pressed something small and hard into her palm. Evelyn opened her hand. It was a beautiful, delicate charm, carved from the hollow, pale bone of an osprey, the bird that sees fish from the sky. It was tied to a simple leather thong. "My brother sees the storm," Ayanna said, her voice soft. "But you are living inside it. When the wind shrieks, when your fear makes you small, hold this. It will remind you to breathe. It will remind you to find your own strength." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak, and tied the thong around her neck. The smooth bone was cool against her skin. She looked at Taza. He was watching her, his rifle in his hand. He gave a single, sharp nod. They rode out, leaving the sanctuary of Ayanna's valley, and pointed their horses toward the smoke, grime, and danger of Copper Bend. They rode down from the high, cold ridges into the dust and the noise. Copper Bend was not a quiet town. It was a scar, gouged out of the desert floor, loud with the sound of hammers on steel and the shouting of freight men. The air, thick with coal smoke and the stench of the tannery, felt heavy and foul after the clean pine of the mountains. The main street was a river of mud, lined with false front buildings, 3 saloons, a land office, and a mercantile. Signs hung crookedly. The only bright, clean things in the entire town were the flags, dozens of them, snapping in the wind, all bearing the red and gold crest of Silas Pike's railroad. They were planted on every street corner, a declaration of ownership. Taza felt the change instantly. In the mountains, he was the hunter. Here, he was the prey. He rode with his rifle across his lap, his face impassive, his eyes scanning every rooftop, every alley. Men stopped their conversations to watch him pass. Their eyes were flat, hostile. He was an Apache, and he was armed, in their world. That was a combination that meant trouble. Evelyn, riding beside him, felt their gazes like a physical weight. She wore Ayanna's spare skirt and shirt, and she knew she looked like she belonged with him, a white woman gone native. She clutched the heavy ledger, now hidden in a saddlebag under Taza's watchful eye. He led the ponies to the livery, his movements calm and deliberate. He paid the stable hand, a weary-looking boy, with a small silver coin. "We will be back before nightfall," Taza said. The boy just nodded, his eyes wide, looking at the knife on Taza's belt. They walked down the rattling boardwalk, the sound of a badly tuned piano banging out of the nearest saloon. Taza's moccasins were silent, but Evelyn's borrowed boots made a hollow sound. They found the church at the end of the street. It was a small, whitewashed building.
the paint peeling, its steeple dwarfed by the railroad's new water tower. It looked small and forgotten, an island of quiet in a town dedicated to noise and greed. They found Reverend Jonas inside, dusting the empty pews. He was a thin man, his hair the color of old snow, his face a web of fine, worried lines. He looked up as they entered, his hands fluttering nervously. He recognized her. His eyes went wide. Miss Hartley Evelyn. "My heavens, child! We heard you ran off. They said you stole money from Mr. Pike." "Reverend Jonas," Evelyn said, walking quickly down the aisle. Taza stayed by the door, a silent, watchful shadow. "I did not steal anything, but I have something he wants. I need your help." "Help," Jonas repeated, his gaze darting to Taza and then back. "What help? Child, what is this?" "You are a good man." Evelyn pressed, her voice low and urgent. "You wrote that letter to the Gazette, the one about Silas Pike stealing the water rights from the ranchers down south. You are not afraid of him." The man flinched as if she had struck him. He hurried to the church door, looking out into the empty street, before pulling it shut. He did not close the latch, Taza noted. A small, cowardly omission. "Please," Jonas whispered. "Do not speak that name so loudly. Those were different times. I was mistaken." "You were not mistaken," Evelyn said. She pulled the ledger from her satchel and laid it on the pulpit. "Here, this is his book, his private accounts. He is bribing Judge Rutherford. He is paying Kincaid's men to drive the Apache from Crow's Pass. He is planning to build a silver mine in their sacred valley. It is all here." The Reverend stared at the book as if it were a coiled rattlesnake. He touched the cover with one trembling finger, then recoiled. I cannot," he stammered, backing away. "You do not understand what you are asking." "I am asking you to help us stop him." Evelyn's voice was rising, sharp with desperation. "Get this to the territorial governor. Get it to the army. You know people. You can make them listen." "No." Jonas's voice was a cracked whisper. He wrung his hands, his face pale with a sickness that was not of the body. "My son, Thomas. You remember my Thomas? He is a good boy. He works for the railroad now. The telegraph office." His eyes met Evelyn's, and she saw the terror in them. "Mr. Pike was very clear. He spoke to me himself. After that letter, he said he admired my passion, but he said that if I ever interfered again, Thomas would not just be fired. He would be implicated. There was a fire at the supply depot last month. Pike said it was amazing how a stray telegraph message could make a man look guilty. He will see my son hang." He pushed the ledger off the pulpit, shoving it back at Evelyn as if it were burning him. "I cannot help you. I am sorry. I truly am. But he owns this town. He owns the law. Take that book and run. Run until you are in California. It is the only way you will live." Evelyn stared at him, her hope collapsing into cold, bitter ash. The one good man she had counted on was broken. He was a prisoner, just like everyone else. Taza moved. He took her arm, his grip firm. "We are leaving," he said, his voice flat. He had expected this. He had seen this kind of fear in men who lived too long around fences. "I am sorry," Jonas called after them as Taza pulled her out into the bright, indifferent sunlight. They stood in the alley beside the church, hidden from the street. Evelyn leaned against the brick, her entire body shaking, not from weakness, but from a profound, consuming rage. "He was the only one," she whispered. "He was our only plan." "He was a weak man," Taza said. His voice was hard, his face a mask. "We find another way." He looked at her, his eyes narrowed, piecing things together. "You called Pike by his first name, Silas, back at the mission. You said he funded it. You said you wrote reports for him. Evelyn could not meet his gaze. She looked at the dust in the alley. Yes. You know him. Taza pressed. Better than you said. How? The secret felt like broken glass in her throat. She had hidden it from him. From Ayanna. She was ashamed. I should have told you. It is not simple. It is very simple, Taza said, his voice low and dangerous. He took a step closer. Kincaid is hunting you. Pike is stealing my land. You are holding the one thing that can stop him, and you are connected to him. Tell me, now. He raised me, she whispered. Taza went completely still. The implications of that, the potential for a betrayal so deep he could not even measure it, struck him like a physical blow. He is your family. No, she snapped, her head coming up, her eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce fire. He is not my family. She took a breath, the words tumbling out, the ones she had never spoken aloud. My mother was his housekeeper, back in Philadelphia. She was a widow. She worked for him my entire life. She died when I was 16. He was my guardian, my keeper. He paid for my schooling. He said it was his duty. He sent you west, Taza said, his mind putting the pieces together. He sent me to the mission he funded, she said, her voice bitter. A place to make myself useful. I was an obligation he did not want. I was not his daughter. I was just a witness. Taza's eyes were cold. A witness who said nothing. He was testing her, pushing her. He had to know. You ate his bread. You lived under his roof. Now you steal his book. Why? Because he did not treat you well, or because he is stealing from my people? The accusation hit her harder than a slap. She flinched, but her gaze did not waver. Do you think I do not know that? She cried, her voice breaking. I am guilty. I am guilty of sitting at his table, wearing the clothes he bought, and listening to him talk about progress and savagery. I was a coward. I was afraid to be sent away, to have nothing. So I said nothing. I smiled. I wrote his pretty lies for him. She struck the wall with her fist. Then I saw Kincaid. I saw him bring a beaten Apache man to Pike's office. I saw Pike tell him to handle it. And I saw the blood on the floor after they left. I knew what my silence was paying for. Her eyes were bright with feverish tears. This is not about him. This is about me. I will not be a coward anymore. I will not be a part of his sin. I owe a debt. Taza watched her. He saw the truth of it, raw and bleeding. He saw the profound, burning guilt that was driving her, a guilt that was deeper than any family loyalty. She was not betraying Silas Pike. She was trying to betray the person she used to be. She had cut the ties. His suspicion did not vanish, but it receded, replaced by a cold, hard understanding. She was as trapped as he was. All right, he said. His voice was softer. If the law is a coward, we speak to the people. We find another way. He looked down the street. Across from the saloon, outside the sheriff's office, was a large glass-fronted notice board. It was covered in papers, land auctions, railroad schedules, county ordinances, and, he knew, a drawing of his own face. The town board, he said. Evelyn looked at it, confused. What about it? It is where the law speaks. Taza said. It is where Pike tells them what to think. We will use his own voice against him. A dangerous, wild spark lit Evelyn's eyes. She understood. The copies, the ones I made at Ayanna's, the map, the bribe list, we post them for everyone to see. It is a desperate move, Taza said, a thin, grim smile touching his lips. It will burn this town to the ground. This town is already rotten, Evelyn replied, her hand moving to the osprey bone at her throat. It is time someone lit the match. They waited. The day dragged on. They bought bread and cheese at the mercantile, eating in the shadows of the livery, As night fell, the town grew louder. The saloons filled. Men stumbled into the street, shouting. After midnight, when the moon was hidden and the only lights came from the saloons, they moved. Taza was a phantom. He moved along the wall, his knife in his hand. Evelyn was his shadow. He reached the notice board. He glanced at the poster bearing his own face. $500. Wanted Taza. For sabotage and murder. He slid his knife under the edge of the glass case and gently pried the cheap lock open. The door swung wide. Evelyn moved in, her hands shaking, but her movements quick. She had a small pot of paste Ayanna had given her, made from pine pitch. She pulled the copies from her satchel. The meticulously drawn map of Crow's Pass, the list of names Rutherford, Kincaid, Pike, the list of bribes. She smeared the paste and pressed the papers flat, right over the railroad schedules and her own wanted poster. Taza swung the glass shut. It clicked. They were gone, melting back into the darkness of the livery stable, hiding in the hayloft just as the first drunk stumbled out of the saloon. They waited. Dawn came, gray and cold. A blacksmith, his face gray with soot, was the first to see it. He stopped, squinting. He read the names. He swore, loudly. He read them again. He ran into the saloon, shouting. Within 10 minutes, a crowd of 20, then 30 men stood in front of the board. They were agitated, confused. They were miners, ranchers, railroad workers. They saw their judge's name linked with Pike's. They saw the map. They saw the word Silver Lode. "He is lying to us," one rancher shouted. "He said the railroad was for us. It is for his own mine. Rutherford is a thief," another yelled. The anger was building, a dry tinder. Then a new shout came from the other end of town. Fire at the warehouse. A thick column of black smoke boiled into the morning sky. The railroad warehouse, the largest building in town, was burning. Men started to run. "It is our supplies, the grain." Bram Kincaid appeared, as if from nowhere, standing on a wagon, his rifle in his hand. He did not look at the fire. He pointed, his finger leveled directly at the alley where Taza and Evelyn had just emerged. "There," he roared. "The Apache, the saboteur Taza. He set the fire. He is trying to burn our town. He is trying to kill us all." The crowd, their anger already primed, turned as one. Their confusion found its target. "The Indian, savage. He did it." They surged forward, their faces twisted with a sudden, murderous rage. "Get him! Hang him!" Taza raised his rifle. "Stay back," he warned, his voice a low growl. "He is lying," Evelyn screamed, but her voice was lost in the roar. A big man in a blacksmith's apron lunged at Taza with a pitchfork. Taza did not shoot. He moved with blinding speed, sidestepping the lunge, and brought the stock of his rifle around in a short, brutal arc, striking the man in the ribs. The man collapsed, the air rushing from his lungs. The mob howled. They were on him. A high, thin scream cut through the noise. It came from the burning warehouse. "Mama, help me, Mama." The mob stopped. They turned, their faces slack with a new horror. "It is the Miller children," a woman on the boardwalk shrieked, her hands flying to her face. "My God, they play in the stables there. They are trapped." The front of the warehouse was a solid wall of yellow flame. The heat was so intense it drove the crowd back. Kincaid, his face a mask of cold fury at his plan being interrupted, stayed on the wagon, his rifle ready. He watched Taza. Taza did not look at Kincaid. He did not look at the mob. He looked at the fire. He heard the child scream again. He dropped his rifle. He sprinted past the shocked faces of the men who, a second before, had wanted to kill him. "Taza, no!" Evelyn cried, running after him, but he was too fast. He grabbed a wet horse blanket from a trough, threw it over his head, and vaulted over the burning loading dock. He disappeared into the choking, black smoke. The street was silent. The only sound was the roar of the fire and the woman, the children's mother, sobbing. The men in the crowd looked at their hands, at the clubs and pitchforks they held. They looked at Kincaid, who made no move to help. An entire minute passed. The roof of the warehouse groaned, a shower of sparks raining down. Then a figure stumbled out of the black smoke. It was Taza. He was walking, his shirt on fire, the blanket gone. He was carrying a small, sobbing girl in his arms. A little boy, no older than 6, was clinging to his back, his face buried in Taza's neck. Taza walked clear of the flames and fell to his knees, his lungs seizing. He gently lowered the children, pushing them toward their mother, who ran and scooped them up. Taza remained on his hands and knees, coughing violently, black smoke pouring from his mouth. The mood of the crowd shattered. The murderous anger vanished, replaced by a deep, profound, and sickening shame. The blacksmith Taza had struck staggered to his feet, holding his ribs, and looked at the Apache, his face a mixture of pain and awe. Kincaid saw his advantage, his mob, his distraction, all gone. With a curse, he jumped down from the wagon and disappeared into the chaos. Evelyn ran to Taza, kneeling beside him, her hands hovering, not knowing where to touch. He was burned on his arms and neck, but he was alive. "That was the bravest damn thing I have ever seen," a voice said. Evelyn looked up. A woman was standing there. She was in her late 20s, dressed in a practical skirt and jacket, her dark hair tied back. She held a reporter's notepad and a pencil. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and missed nothing. "And," the woman continued, "I was at the notice board at dawn. I read every word before Mr. Kincaid's convenient fire. I am Clara Boone. I write for the Territorial Gazette." She looked from Evelyn's shocked face to Taza's pained one. "I have been trying to find solid proof against Pike for 6 months. You two just handed it to me." Clara pulled them from the open street into the alley as the crowd surged toward the fire with buckets. "We do not have much time. That fire bought you a reprieve, but Kincaid will be back. Give me the book, the original. I will get it to the United States Attorney in Santa Fe." "No," Taza rasped, getting to his feet, his voice a raw cough. "The original stays with us. You take the copies." "The copies will not be enough," Clara argued. "I need the original, the signatures, the embossed seals. And Kincaid will kill us to get it," Taza countered. He was thinking clearly, past the pain. "As long as we have it, we are the target. You are the messenger. We will be the decoy. You will ride free." Clara looked at him, seeing the hard, tactical wisdom. "All right, he is right." Evelyn took the packet of copies from her satchel and pressed them into Clara's hands. "Please, hurry!" "I have the fastest horse in this territory," Clara said, her face grim. "But Santa Fe is a long ride. It will take me 3 days, 72 hours. Can you stay alive that long?" 72 hours. Taza repeated, the deadline. He looked at the mountains. "That is when Pike's surveyors start." "Godspeed," Clara said. She squeezed Evelyn's arm, gave Taza a nod of profound respect, and vanished. The fire was dying. The warehouse was a smoking skeleton. The town was chaotic. "We have to go," Taza said, his voice raw. "Back to Ayana. We hide. We wait." "We did not lose Taza," Evelyn said, touching his burned arm. "We started it." "We started it," he agreed. "Now we have to survive it." They moved through the chaos toward the livery. As they reached the back alley, a figure stepped from the shadows. It was Grey Wolf, the young Apache warrior from Ayana's camp. His horse was lathered, his face a mask of terror and shame. "Taza," he choked out in Apache. "They came. They were not fooled." Taza's blood went cold. He grabbed the young man's shirt. "Who came where?" "Kincaid's men," Grey Wolf whispered, his voice breaking. They did not follow you. They knew. They went to the camp. They took her. They took Ayanna. Taza's world, which had been smoke and fire and pain, suddenly went silent and cold and still. Where? He whispered, his voice so deadly it did not sound like his own. Grey Wolf could not speak. He held out his hand. He was holding a single piece of paper, torn and crumpled. It was not a copy. It was an original page from Evelyn's ledger, one she had left with Ayanna for safekeeping. Scrawled across the bottom in Kincaid's rough, blocky handwriting were 9 words. Crow's Pass. Bring the book, if you want your sister alive. The black, cold rage in Taza was a force of nature. It burned away the pain from his skin, the exhaustion from his muscles, the shame from the Copper Bend fire. He did not speak. He did not look at Evelyn's horrified face or Grey Wolf's profile of shame. He simply grabbed the reins of his pony, swung onto its back, and turned the horse's head back toward the high, cold mountains. He rode as if the devil himself were on his heels. Evelyn and Grey Wolf had no choice but to follow. They rode out of the noise and the smoke, pushing the horses hard, climbing back into the thin, cold air. Crow's Pass. Kincaid had named the place of the exchange. It was a 2-hour ride, and Taza made it in 1. His face a mask of stone, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. Crow's Pass was a deep, jagged scar in the granite spine of the mountains. It was the only way through this section of the ridge wide enough for a wagon, a fact Silas Pike's surveyors had noted well. The wind, even on a calm day, ripped through the narrows with a high, mournful shriek. The walls were sheer, rising near 500 feet, scarred with ledges and crevices. It was a shooting gallery, a perfect place for a trap. Taza stopped them a 1/4 mile from the mouth of the pass. In a thick stand of pine, he slid from his pony. He was breathing hard, but his hands were steady. He looked at Grey Wolf, the young warrior who had failed to protect Ayanna. Grey Wolf could not meet his eyes. "You will stay here," Taza said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You will guard the horses. If you see Kincaid's men, you will warn us. 1 shot, then you ride. You ride to the elders. You tell them what Pike is doing. You tell them I said to use the truth. Fight with the book, not with bullets. Do you understand?" Grey Wolf nodded, his face tight with misery. I will not fail again. Taza." "See that you do not," Taza said, turning his back on him. He looked at Evelyn. The terror that had gripped her in the cabin was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that matched his own. He pulled the heavy ledger from his own saddlebag. He handed it to her. "No," he said. "This stays with you. You are the second plan. You are the messenger." He then unbuckled the gun belt he wore. It held a heavy Colt pistol and a handful of cartridges. He handed it to her. "You remember what Ayanna taught you? How to breathe, how to aim." "I remember," she said, her voice steady, fastening the heavy belt around her own small waist. It was impossibly large, but she did not care. "Stay here," he commanded. "Stay in these rocks, where you can see the mouth of the pass. You are my eyes. I will walk in alone. Kincaid will have men on the rim. I will count them. You will watch them. Do not show yourself. Not unless Ayanna is free. If she is free, and I am not, you run. You take that book and you ride until you find Clara Boone, or the army, or God himself. You do not look back." "I am not running, Taza," Evelyn said, her hand resting on the smooth bone at her throat. "I am done running." He looked at her, truly seeing her. The starved, frightened teacher was gone. In her place was a woman made of wire and steel. He nodded once. "Then you will know what to do." He turned and walked away from her, his rifle left with his horse. He carried only the knife at his belt. His burned shirt was torn, his arms stiff. He kept his hands open and at his sides. walking with a steady, deliberate pace into the throat of the trap. The pass was silent, save for the high, screaming wind. He walked for 100 yards. The pass then opened into a small, circular basin, a natural amphitheater of stone. Kincaid was there. He was sitting casually on a large wooden crate marked with the railroad's emblem. He was chewing tobacco. Ayanna was 20 feet from him, her hands tied to the wheel of a heavy freight wagon. Her mouth was gagged, but her eyes were alive, burning with a cold, pure hatred. 2 of Kincaid's men were visible. One stood near Ayanna, his rifle held ready. The other was on a wide ledge, 20 feet up, his own rifle resting on a rock, aimed directly at Taza's chest. Taza knew there were more. He scanned the rim, his eyes moving, counting, searching for the glint of sun on steel. He saw nothing, but he knew they were there. Well, well, Kincaid drawled, spitting a stream of brown juice onto the rocks. Look who it is, the town hero, come to save the day again. Taza's gaze was fixed on Ayanna. He saw she was unharmed, just bound. He let out a breath he did not know he was holding. Let her go. Kincaid. Oh, I do not think so, Kincaid said, enjoying himself. He stood up, hooking his thumbs in his belt. You caused me a lot of trouble today. Taza. A lot. Burned down a warehouse. Got the whole town spooked. Pike is not happy. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. But he is impressed. You are famous now. Did you know the poster in town is old? There is a new one, just for you. Wanted for sabotage, arson, and attempted murder. Pike put a bounty on your head himself. Kincaid leaned forward, as if sharing a secret. $500. Think of that, $500. Just for your scalp. I am here, Taza said, his voice a low growl. She has nothing to do with this. Let her go, and I will take her place. You get me. You get the bounty. It is a good trade. Kincaid stroked his bearded chin, pretending to think. It is a good trade, a very good trade, but it is not the trade I want. I want the book. Where is it? Let her go, Taza repeated. I give you my word. I will take you to it. Your word, Kincaid laughed again. The word of a half-breed, I do not think so. He nodded to the man on the ledge. He has got a clean shot. I think you will tell me where the book is, or I will have him put a bullet in your sister's knee. Then I will have him put one in yours. From her position in the rocks, Evelyn saw it all. She saw Taza, Kincaid, Ayanna, and the 2 visible guards. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest. Taza had told her to watch. She was watching. She scanned the high rim, just as he had. The wind was brutal, stinging her eyes. And then she saw him, high up on the north rim. A man lying flat, almost invisible, his rifle barrel resting in a notch of rock. He was not aiming at Taza. He was aiming at Ayanna. He was the executioner. Beside this hidden sniper, Kincaid's men had set up a small supply depot. A heavy crate was suspended from a thick rope, which was looped through an iron pulley system, a way to lower gear down the sheer cliff face. The rope was tied off on a single iron spike driven into the rock. Evelyn did not think. She did not plan. She acted. She drew the heavy pistol. She rested it on the boulder in front of her, steadying her shaking hands. She did not aim for the man. She aimed for the rope. She remembered Ayanna's words. Breathe. She took one sharp breath and squeezed the trigger. The shot was a small crack against the wind. The bullet was true. It struck the strained rope. 3 feet above the crate, the rope snapped. The heavy crate, full of tools or ammunition, ripped free. It did not hit the sniper. It crashed onto the ledge directly beside him, exploding in a shower of splintered wood and rock. The sniper yelled in terror. his rifle firing uselessly into the sky as he scrambled to save himself from falling. The basin was thrown into chaos. The instant the shot echoed, Taza did not dive for cover. He attacked. He closed the 20 yards between himself and Kincaid in a heartbeat, a low, guttural roar ripping from his chest. He hit Kincaid like a freight train, his shoulder driving into the bigger man's chest, taking him clean off his feet. They crashed to the ground, Taza's hand seeking Kincaid's throat. It was not a fight. It was an execution. The guard near Ayana spun, raising his rifle, but a second crack echoed from the rocks. A bullet chipped the stone at his feet. "Get away from her!" Evelyn screamed, her voice a thin, wild cry. The guard scrambled for cover behind the wagon, firing blindly at her position. The man on the lower ledge was doing the same, the pass now filled with the roar of gunfire and ricochets. Taza and Kincaid rolled in the dust. Kincaid was a bear, heavy and brutal, but Taza was a wolf, all speed and cold fury. Taza smashed his elbow into Kincaid's face. Kincaid roared, his hand scrambling for the heavy skinning knife at his belt. He got it free, a long 9-inch blade. He slashed upward, wildly. Taza twisted, trying to get inside the arc of the blade. He was not fast enough. The point of the knife caught him, raking across his left shoulder, slicing through his burned shirt and deep into the muscle beneath. A bolt of pure, white-hot fire shot down Taza's arm. He cried out, his grip loosening. His arm went numb, useless. Kincaid laughed, a breathless, bloody sound. He saw the wound. He saw the blood pouring out. He raised the knife high, his arm tensed for the final, killing blow. "Die, you savage!" Crack. Evelyn's third shot. It did not hit Kincaid. It hit the iron rim of the wagon wheel, inches from his head. The bullet shrieked, a high-pitched, terrifying sound that made Kincaid flinch, his killing stroke going wide, burying itself in the dirt by Taza's head. Taza. Ayana was free. She had worked her hands loose in the chaos. She did not run. She grabbed a heavy pickaxe left by the survey crew. She ran to her brother, grabbing his good arm. "Now!" she screamed. "Run!" Taza staggered to his feet, his left side covered in blood, his arm hanging limp. Ayana pulled him, half dragging him, toward the mouth of the pass. Kincaid was getting to his feet, his face a mask of black rage, raising his knife again. Evelyn ran from her cover, reloading as she moved. She was in the open now, desperate. Go, I will stop him." Kincaid saw her, saw the book in the satchel at her waist, saw Taza escaping. "No," he roared. Kill them all." Evelyn saw the crate Kincaid had been sitting on. Dynamite. Beside it, a smaller, open box of blasting caps. She stopped. She raised the pistol one last time. She did not aim for Kincaid. She aimed for the small tin box of caps. She fired. The bullet struck the box. The detonation was not a massive boom. It was a sharp, vicious, blinding flash. The blasting caps went off as one, igniting a keg of black powder stored beside them. A secondary, massive explosion tore the wagon to pieces. A wheel spun 100 feet into the air. The basin was instantly filled with a thick, choking cloud of black smoke, splintered wood, and fire. The shockwave threw Evelyn to the ground. It threw Kincaid and his remaining men flat, stunned and deafened. Evelyn, Taza's voice, raw with pain. She scrambled to her feet, her ears ringing. Taza and Ayana were at the pass entrance, waiting for her. She ran. She did not look back. The three of them plunged into the narrow, winding canyon, leaving the smoke and the shouting behind them. Just as the first cold drops of a sudden, violent rain began to fall. The sky opened. The rain, driven by the mountain wind, turned from drops to an icy deluge in seconds. It washed the blood from Taza's arm, turning the dust at their feet to slick, running mud. "In here!" Ayana gasped, her voice tight with panic. She pulled them into a shallow overhang. a hollow in the rock that offered meager shelter from the storm. Taza slumped against the back wall, his face a pale, ghostly gray. The fury was gone. Replaced by the shock of the wound, he was shivering violently. "He is bleeding too much," Ayana said, tearing at his shirt, exposing the long, deep, clean cut. "Hold him. Press this against it. Hard. As hard as you can." She pushed a wad of cloth into Evelyn's hands, and then disappeared back into the storm. "I will find Yarrow. It is the only way. Do not let him sleep." Evelyn was alone with him. She dropped to her knees in the mud, pressing her full weight onto the wound. Taza groaned, his body going rigid, his teeth clenched. "I am sorry," she whispered, her own tears mixing with the rain on her face. "I am so sorry, Taza. This is my fault, all of it." He opened his eyes. The scout, the warrior, was gone. It was just him, a man in agonizing pain. He looked at her, his dark eyes seeming to see into her very soul. "No," he rasped, his voice barely audible. This was Pike's choice, Kincaid's choice, mine." "You are hurt," she sobbed, pressing harder as the blood soaked the cloth. "You are dying because of me." "I am alive," he whispered. His good hand, his right hand, came up. It was caked in mud and his own blood. He did not touch her face. He touched the osprey bone at her throat. His fingers were surprisingly warm. "You saved us. You saw the sniper. You shot the rope." "You taught me to see," she whispered back, her heart breaking. "You taught me to trust," he said, his eyes fluttering. "Stay with me, Taza," she cried, grabbing his face with her free hand. "Do not go, please." Ayana slid back into the cave, soaked, her hands full of a dark, feathery green plant, yarrow. She knelt, chewed the leaves into a quick, dark poultice, and pushed Evelyn's hand away. "This will hurt," she said. She packed the mash of herbs deep into the open wound. Taza's back arched off the rock, a silent scream frozen on his face, but he did not pass out. Ayana took the bloody cloth and bound the wound, pulling the knot so tight Evelyn winced. "It will hold," Ayana said, her voice shaking. She looked from her brother's pale face to Evelyn's. Her eyes were dark and knowing. "I must check the pass, see if the rain has washed our tracks, see if they are following." She gave Evelyn a long, meaningful look. "I will be gone for some time. Keep him warm." Ayana vanished back into the storm. They were alone. The only sound was the steady, drumming roar of the rain on the stone outside. Taza was shivering, his body shaking with cold and blood loss. Evelyn did not hesitate. She sat beside him, pressing her body against his good side. She wrapped her arms around his chest, trying to force her own warmth into his body. He was cold, his skin like ice. He let his head rest against her shoulder. For a long time, they sat in silence, breathing together. "You were wrong," he whispered, his voice stronger now, the shivering easing slightly. "What?" she whispered back, her face buried in his damp hair. "At the fire, Ayana's camp," he said. "You said, home is a place where a promise is kept." "I remember," she breathed, her heart aching. "It is not a place," he said. He turned his head, his face just inches from hers. The world outside, the rain, the cold. Kincaid. It all disappeared. There was only the darkness of the small cave and the heat building between them. "It is not a cabin or a valley." His good hand moved, finding hers, his fingers lacing through her smaller ones. "It is a person." Evelyn's breath hitched. Her heart, which she thought was broken, suddenly felt full to bursting. She looked at his mouth,
so close to hers. "Taza?" she whispered. It was a question, an answer, and a prayer. He leaned in, slowly, his dark eyes holding hers. He was giving her time to pull away. She did not. She rose to meet him, her hand coming up to cup his face. Their lips met. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of finding. It was a kiss of profound relief. It was hesitant, then deepened, a slow, sure promise in the midst of the storm. It tasted of rain and smoke and the faint, metallic tang of his blood. It was the most real, the most honest, the most powerful thing she had ever felt. When they finally broke apart, they rested their foreheads together. He was not shivering anymore. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he had no name for. She looked at him, her eyes clear. The last of her fear burned away. "I am here," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "You are right." She pressed her hand, the one holding his, over his heart. "This is home." The rain began to soften. Ayana returned, her face unreadable in the dim light. "The storm has washed the past clean. They are not following. Not today." Taza and Evelyn had moved apart, but the air in the cave was different, charged. "We cannot kill him," Evelyn said, her voice quiet but firm. Taza looked at her, his wound aching, his heart full. "He tried to kill me, Eve." "I know," she said. Her hand touched the ledger at her waist. "But Clara is riding for Santa Fe. We have to honor that. We have to let the law work. If we become murderers, then we are no better than he is. We become the savages Pike says we are. We lose." Taza looked at Ayana. His sister nodded, a small, proud smile on her face. "She speaks the truth. My brother, we must give the law a chance. It is the only way we win." Taza nodded, the last of the black rage gone, replaced by a heavy, clear resolve. "All right, no more killing, but we still have to stop that survey. Clara needs time. We have maybe 48 hours. "How?" Ayana asked. "We cannot fight Kincaid and the survey crew." A slow, dangerous smile touched Taza's lips. Despite the pain, he looked past Evelyn, out of the cave, toward the high, wet mesas in the distance. "No," he said, his good hand tightening its grip on hers. "We do not have to fight them, but I know who can." "Who?" Evelyn asked. "The Mustangs," he said. "The Blue Roan. They are the spirit of this land. It is time Pike's Railroad learned what true, wild freedom looks like." As if the world was listening, a new sound drifted on the wet wind. It was distant, but unmistakable. It was high, lonely, and mechanical. It was the wail of a steam whistle. Evelyn's blood went cold. "What is that?" Taza's face went grim. He listened, counting the seconds. "The test train," he said, his voice hard as iron. "They are early. The clock is not ticking anymore. Evelyn, it has just struck the hour." The train whistle was a shriek of steel on steel, a violation of the high, cold air. Taza got to his feet, his body a map of pain, his left arm throbbing with a dull, heavy fire. Ayana's poultice held, but the wound was deep. He did not care. The sound of that whistle focused his mind, burning away everything but the immediate, desperate need for a plan. "They are at the temporary station," he said, his voice a low, raw rasp. "At the mouth of the valley. They are unloading the surveyors. We have no time. We have to move." "Taza, you are wounded," Evelyn said, her hand reaching for his good arm. He was pale, a fine sheen of cold sweat on his face. "You cannot ride like this." "I can," he said, his voice flat. He looked at Ayana. "My sister, you must go. Take Grey Wolf's horse. Ride to the elders. Tell them to bring the people. Not to fight, to watch. Tell them to come to the station, to stand and watch what Pike does. The world must see this."
Ayana looked at the determination in his face, the unbending steel. She nodded once. I will bring them, my brother. But what will you do? He will do what he said, Evelyn said, her voice quiet, but with a new, strange authority. She was no longer asking, she was stating, he will find the Mustangs, and I will help him. Ayana looked at this white woman, this teacher, who had brought so much chaos. She saw the way Evelyn looked at Taza, not with fear, but with a fierce, protective loyalty. She saw the way Taza, in his pain, leaned ever so slightly toward her strength. Be smart, my brother, Ayana said. She touched his good shoulder. You are our heart. She touched Evelyn's arm. And you are his breath. Do not let his anger burn him out. She turned and slipped away into the rocks, moving with a speed and silence that was all her own. The Mustangs, Taza said, his focus narrowing. They water at the high spring, 2 miles north of here. They will be there now, after the rain. We can use the old game trail. What is the plan, Taza? Evelyn asked, pulling his good arm over her shoulder, taking his weight as they began to move. The Blue Roan flow. What does it mean? He gritted his teeth as they climbed. The Mustangs. I have watched them for years. The Blue Roan stallion. He is smart. He trusts me. At a distance. He knows my scent. I have left salt for him in the winters. He knows I am not a threat. They reached their ponies, hidden in the rocks. Mounting was an agony for Taza, but he did it, his face rigid with the effort. The surveyors, he panted, will set up their tripod, their transit. It is their most important tool. It is the eye that steals the land. It will be at the head of the valley, on the new tracks, pointed at the sacred ground. And the Mustangs, Evelyn pressed. They have a run, he said, a path they take when they are frightened, a deep, narrow arroyo that leads right past the head of the valley. It is their escape route. If we can spook them, just right, we can send 24 tons of wild horse flesh straight at Pike's new railroad. They will not trample the men. They will avoid them. But the equipment, the tracks, they will be destroyed. It was a plan of beautiful, chaotic simplicity. It was a plan born of the land itself. How do we guide them? Evelyn asked, her mind racing. How do we aim them? Fire. Taza said, they fear it, but they respect it. They will run from it. We need 3 points, 3 torches, to create a funnel, to push them from their grazing land and into the arroyo. He looked at her, his eyes dark with the strain. I cannot do it alone. Evelyn, not with this arm. I can get to the stallion. I can start the run, but I cannot be in 3 places at once. I need you. I need you to set the 2nd torch. And the 3rd. Ayana has already sent Grey Wolf. He failed once. He will not fail again. He is waiting at the south ridge. I will set the 1st torch. On the north. You must take the center. It is the most dangerous. You will be in the open, on the mesa, between the herd and the arroyo. You must light it at exactly the right moment. Not too soon, or they will scatter. Not too late, or they will run over you. He was asking her to stand in the path of a stampede. She looked at his face, at the lines of pain, at the absolute, desperate trust in his eyes. She touched the osprey bone at her throat. I will not be too late, she said. They rode. The world was a blur of wet rock and driving wind. Taza found the hawk feathers he had left in a small cache, bundles of them, along with a pot of pitch. He fashioned 2 rough torches, giving one to Evelyn. They separated. He pointed. There, the flat rock that looks like a hand. Wait for my signal. Wait for the hawk's cry. Then light it and ride for your life. He was gone. A gray shadow moving toward the high spring. Evelyn was alone. She rode to the flat rock, her heart a cold, hard hammer in her chest. She had the torch, her pistol, and the ledger, its weight a constant reminder. From here, She could see the entire valley spread out below. She saw the temporary station. The train was there, a black, smoking engine and 3 cars. Men were milling about. She saw the survey crew, already at work, setting up their delicate tripod of brass and glass on the newly laid tracks. She saw a large tent and men on horseback, Kincaid's men, guarding the surveyors. And she saw a man in a black, expensive city coat, a tall hat on his head. He was pointing, gesturing, giving orders. Even from half a mile away, she knew him, the way he stood, the arrogant tilt of his head. Silas Pike. He had come himself to watch his great machine begin to chew up the land. Taza, meanwhile, had found the herd. They were grazing peacefully, the magnificent blue roan stallion at their head. Taza moved slowly, downwind, his movements calm, non-threatening. He reached the north ridge. He lit his torch. He gave the cry, a high, sharp, perfect imitation of a red-tailed hawk. Evelyn heard it. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely strike the match. She lit the pitch-soaked torch. It flared to life, a bright, yellow, smoking flame. She held it high. The blue roan stallion saw it. He raised his head, his nostrils flaring. He snorted, a high, nervous sound. Then, from the south, Grey Wolf's torch flared. The trap was set. Taza rode out from the rocks, his own torch held high, shouting a wild Apache cry, his good arm waving. The herd panicked. The stallion saw the fire to the north, the fire to the south. The only way clear was the center, the mesa. He whinnied, a high, sharp command, and turned. The entire herd, 30 strong, moved as one. A wave of muscle and terror, thundering across the open ground. Evelyn's heart stopped. They were coming at her. "Not yet," she whispered, her knuckles white on the torch. "Not yet?" They were 100 yards away, the sound of their hooves a low, rolling thunder. "Now," she breathed. She threw her torch onto the dry brush at her feet. It exploded in a wall of fire. The stallion saw it. He veered sharply, exactly as Taza had predicted. He turned from her fire into the deep, wide arroyo that was his escape. The entire herd followed, a river of thundering hooves, flowing into the narrow channel. The arroyo funneled them, aimed them, and shot them out directly at the head of the valley. At the station, Silas Pike was the first to hear it. He looked up, annoyed by the interruption. His annoyance turned to disbelief. A tidal wave of blue and gray horses, their eyes white with fear, their manes flying, erupted from the arroyo. "My God," one of the surveyors whispered, dropping his notebook. The mustangs did not slow. They hit the rail line at a full, terrified gallop. The delicate survey transit, the brass eye of the railroad, was obliterated, kicked into 100 pieces. The herd, desperate, split around the train, thundering past the cars, their hooves striking sparks on the steel. They were a force of pure, wild nature. They struck the newly laid tracks, a section not yet fully anchored. The force of their passing, the sheer weight and power, ripped the new rails from their wooden sleepers, bending the steel as if it were soft lead. The train was trapped. The line was destroyed. The mustangs were gone as quickly as they came, a vision of dust and fury, disappearing into the far canyons. There was a moment of absolute, stunned silence. Silas Pike's face was a mask of purple rage. He had seen it all, and just as the dust began to settle, he saw her, Evelyn, riding down from the mesa, her face smudged with soot, her hair wild. "You," he breathed, his voice a low, venomous hiss. He walked toward her as she dismounted, her pistol still in her hand. "You, after everything I did for you, I fed you, I clothed you, I gave you an education, and this is how you repay me siding with the savages, destroying my property." "Your property?" Evelyn's voice was clear, and it carried in the stunned silence. The townspeople, the railroad workers who had gathered to watch the survey were all listening. This was never your property. Silas. She unslung the satchel. She pulled out the heavy, brass-cornered ledger. She held it high, just as she had held the torch.
"You call them savages?"
she cried, her voice ringing with a power she did not know she possessed.
"But you are the thief. I have the proof he has been bribing Judge Rutherford. He is stealing this land, not for a railroad, but for his own private silver mine. It is all here."
"Lies," Pike roared. "She is a thief. A liar. Kincaid sees her." Bram Kincaid, his face a patchwork of bruises from Taza's attack, his arm in a sling, stepped from behind the train. His good hand held his rifle. He was not looking at Evelyn. He was looking past her, at the ridge. Taza was there, on his pony, watching. "It is over. Pike!" Kincaid growled. His rage was not at Evelyn. It was at Taza. "You!" he shouted, raising his rifle. "You, half-breed, this ends!" He fired. The shot was wild, aimed at Taza a quarter-mile away. It went high, but at that exact moment, a townswoman, drawn by the commotion, was walking onto the tracks. The bullet struck her. She cried out, a small, surprised sound, and crumpled to the ground, a dark stain spreading on her dress. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. It was one thing to fight savages. It was another to shoot a white woman in the town square. Ayanna, who had arrived with the elders, saw it. She had a small, boxy device in her hands, a camera. One Clara Boone must have left with her. As the woman fell, Ayanna raised the camera, and the bright chemical flash of the magnesium powder exploded, capturing the image Kincaid with his smoking rifle. The fallen woman, the horrified crowd. It was the evidence. He shot Mrs. Miller," the blacksmith from town shouted, his face white with shock. Kincaid's face was a mask of pure, murderous fury. He saw Taza riding down from the ridge, coming for him. He saw the crowd turning on him. He saw Ayanna with the camera. He raised his rifle again, this time at Taza. Taza spurred his pony. He was riding straight for the narrow, wooden trestle bridge that crossed the ravine just before the station. Kincaid ran to meet him, to cut him off. They met in the middle of the bridge. Taza, his left arm useless, threw himself from his horse, his good arm colliding with Kincaid's rifle. The gun spun away, clattering onto the wooden planks. It was just the two of them. Kincaid, with his broken arm, and Taza, with his bleeding shoulder. They were two wounded animals, locked in a brutal, desperate fight. Kincaid drove his head into Taza's chest. Taza staggered, but did not fall. He brought his knee up, hard, into Kincaid's gut. Kincaid gasped, but his good hand found Taza's throat. He was choking him, his fingers digging deep, his face inches from Taza's. "I will kill you," he snarled. Taza was losing, his vision going dark. He saw Evelyn running toward them, but she was too far. He saw Silas Pike, his face a mask of rage, shouting orders no one was following. With his last ounce of strength, Taza did not fight Kincaid's grip. He grabbed the rifle on the boards, his good hand closing around the barrel. He did not try to shoot. He raised it, and with a final, desperate heave, he swung it like a club, smashing the heavy wooden stock against Kincaid's head. Kincaid went limp, his grip releasing. He staggered back, stunned, his eyes rolling. Taza stood, panting, his vision clearing. He held the rifle. Kincaid was on his knees, defenseless, at the edge of the bridge. Taza could end it. One push, one bullet. He saw Evelyn's face. If we become murderers, we lose. He raised the rifle high, reversed it, and brought the stock down again. Not on Kincaid's head, but on the rifle's own trigger guard. He smashed it against the wooden rail. The mechanism broke. He lifted the ruined gun, raised it over his head, and with a final roar of defiance, he threw it into the ravine below. It was over. He had kept his word. At the station, Silas Pike saw his enforcer defeated. He saw the crowd, their faces angry, looking at him, at the woman Kincaid had shot, at the ledger in Evelyn's hand. He saw the bent rails. He saw his plan, his mine, his empire, crumbling. He snapped. "Fools!" he shrieked, his voice a high, thin sound. "You will all obey me. I am the law here." He ran to the freight car, the one Kincaid's men had been guarding. He threw open the door. It was filled with crates of dynamite. "You want savagery," he screamed, his eyes wild. "I will give you savagery." He grabbed a stick of dynamite and a coil of fuse. He lit it with a shaky hand. The fuse hissed to life. "Shoot them," he ordered his remaining men. "Shoot all of them." But his men were looking at the dynamite, at the wild look in his eyes. They backed away. Pike laughed, a high, crazed sound. He was about to throw the hissing explosive into the crowd. At that exact moment, a sudden, powerful gust of wind, the tail of the retreating storm, swept down the canyon. It hit the side of the train car, slamming the heavy wooden door shut. The door struck Pike's arm as he was about to throw. The dynamite flew from his hand. It did not go into the crowd. It flew backward, into the other open boxcar, the one filled with supplies, kerosene, oil, rags. Silas Pike's eyes went wide. "No!" The explosion was deafening. It blew the side of the boxcar apart. A fireball rolled into the sky, and in an instant, Pike's own supply train was a roaring inferno. The wind, the same wind that had saved them, now fanned the flames, pushing the fire back toward the new warehouse, the one filled with his personal goods. Taza and Evelyn, on the bridge, saw it all, and they saw something else. The fire was spreading to the dynamite car. A stray spark landed on a long, unlit fuse that snaked out of the open door. It began to hiss, a white, hot spark, racing toward the crates inside. There was enough dynamite in that car to level the entire station, the bridge, and everyone there. "You're the fuse!" Taza yelled. He and Evelyn ran, their steps pounding on the wooden planks. They were not running away. They were running toward it. They reached the car together. The fuse was burning, only 6 inches from the open crate. Taza, his arm useless, could not pull it. Evelyn grabbed it, but it was wedged under a crate. "The knife!" Taza roared. Evelyn pulled his long hunting knife from its sheath. She did not try to pull the fuse. She sliced down, her hand steady, severing it with one clean cut. The spark died, 1 inch from the crate. They were safe. They turned, panting, leaning against the car, as Silas Pike, his fine coat on fire, his face black with soot, stumbled from the inferno he had created. A heavy, burning timber from the warehouse roof collapsed, striking him and pinning him to the ground. He screamed, a high, thin sound of terror and agony, trapped in his own fire. And over the roar of the flames, over the screams of the wounded and the shouts of the crowd, a new sound emerged, clear, sharp, and cold. It was the sound of a bugle, blowing an army charge. A line of blue-coated cavalrymen rode into the station, their carbines ready. They were not alone. At their head rode a tall man with a silver star on his chest, a federal marshal, and beside him, a weary, dust-covered woman on a fast horse. Clara Boone. She had not ridden to Santa Fe. She had ridden to Fort Verde. She had brought the law. The marshal looked at the burning train, at the wounded woman, at Taza and Evelyn by the dynamite car, at the cowering Kincaid on the bridge, and at Silas Pike, trapped and screaming in the flames. He looked at the ledger in Evelyn's hand. "My God," the marshal said, his voice quiet. "What in the name of the territory happened here?" The federal marshal, Harrison, swung down from his horse, his face a grim mask of dust and authority. The scene before him was one of utter chaos. A train was burning, sending a column of black, oily smoke into the sky. A man in a fine city suit was screaming, pinned by a burning timber. Another man, beaten and bloodied, was cowering on a trestle bridge, and a crowd of agitated townspeople, Apache elders and armed cavalrymen, were all staring at each other in the sudden, terrible silence. "Sergeant!" Harrison's voice cut through the roar of the flames. "Get that man out of the fire! Get the wounded! All of them! Attended to! Secure this area! No one, and I mean no one, leaves this station!" Soldiers moved with disciplined speed. 4 of them ran forward with axes, pulling the heavy, burning timber off Silas Pike. He was alive, but his screams turned to a high, thin moan. His expensive coat was melted to his skin, his face a mask of soot and agonizing burns. Clara Boone was at the marshal's side instantly. "Marshal Harrison, this is the man, Silas Pike, and this." She pointed to Evelyn, who stood shaking, her face pale beneath the grime. "Is Evelyn Hartley. She has the proof." Evelyn, her legs feeling like water, stepped forward. She held out the heavy leather ledger. It was her only weapon, and her only defense. As the soldiers carried Pike past on a makeshift stretcher, his wild, pain-crazed eyes focused on Taza, who stood beside Evelyn, his left arm hanging useless, soaked in blood. "Savage!" Pike shrieked, his voice a ruined croak. He pointed a burned, shaking finger. "He did it in uprising. They attacked my train. They tried to kill us all." Marshal Harrison looked from Pike's ruined face to Taza. He saw the Apache, wounded, standing protectively beside the white woman. He saw the crowd of townspeople who were not looking at Taza with fear, but with a strange mixture of awe and shame. This did not look like an uprising. "I need the truth," Harrison said, his voice flat. "And I need it now." "The truth is in this book, Marshal," Clara said, her voice ringing with indignation. She took the ledger from Evelyn's hand. She did not wait to be asked. She opened it, her finger running down the neat, damning columns. An entry, "Marshal," Clara read, her voice carrying over the crackle of the fire. "April the 10th, to Judge Rutherford, $500 for favorable survey adjudication." And another, "B. Kincaid, relocation expenses, $1,000. And here, the map, the illegal spur line, the one they are dying for, leading straight to Pike's private silver lode, in the valley, the one he swore the railroad would never touch. A low, angry murmur rose from the crowd. They had been lied to. They had been used. "She is right, Marshal—" It was the blacksmith from Copper Bend, his apron scorched, his face angry. We thought he pointed at Taza, "had set the fire in town. We were wrong. Pike's man, Kincaid, he did it. He set it to stop us from seeing this very book." "It is true," another man shouted, a rancher. "And that ain't all. Kincaid, he shot Mrs. Miller in cold blood. She is bleeding over there." "I have the proof," Ayanna said, her voice quiet but strong. She stepped forward, past the soldiers, holding the box camera, the photograph of Kincaid, with the smoking rifle, aiming at the crowd. Harrison's face was granite. He looked toward the bridge. Kincaid saw it. He saw the marshal's cold eyes, the soldiers, the camera, the crowd. His world had ended. He was a cornered rat. He made a desperate break for it, scrambling to his feet, trying to run for the far side of the ravine. "Stop that man!" Harrison roared. 2 burly railroad workers, men who had just watched their own supply train, their food and pay, go up in flames, stepped onto the bridge. They held heavy track hammers. They blocked Kincaid's path. "Not so fast, you murdering bastard," one of them growled, his knuckles white on the hammer. Kincaid stopped, his one good arm raised in surrender. He was trapped. "Sergeant," Harrison said, his voice like ice, "arrest Mr. Kincaid. Charge him with the shooting of Mrs. Miller, attempted murder, and conspiracy. He will be tried in Santa Fe." He turned his gaze to the moaning, stretcher-bound Silas Pike. "And cuff him. He is under arrest for bribery, conspiracy to defraud the United States territory, and public terrorism. Put this entire station under federal seal. This is a crime scene." The legal checkmate was total. Soldiers moved in, snapping iron cuffs onto Kincaid's wrists. Another pair secured Pike to the stretcher. The reign of Silas Pike was over, ending not in glory, but in fire, chains, and the stench of his own burning hubris. With the immediate crisis over, Harrison turned his attention to the center of the storm, Taza and Evelyn. Taza had not moved. He was watching the soldiers, his body tense, knowing what was coming. A local deputy, one from Copper Bend who had ridden with the cavalry, stepped forward, holding a crumpled, soot-stained poster. "Marshal, sir," the deputy said, his voice full of self-importance. "That's him, the Apache. That's Taza. There is a warrant out, $500, for sabotage and arson, the Copper Bend fire." The soldiers who had been ignoring Taza now tensed, their hands moving to their weapons. He was no longer a victim. He was a wanted man. Before the marshal could even speak, Evelyn stepped directly in front of Taza, her small body a shield. Her face was set, her eyes burning. "No." "Ma'am, that is a lawful warrant," Harrison said, his voice hardening. "Step aside." "It is a lie," Evelyn said, her voice clear and ringing, refusing to be intimidated. "It is a piece of paper signed by Silas Pike, the same man you just arrested for bribery. It is as worthless as his word. You want testimony, ask them." She pointed to the blacksmith. "Ask him who set the fire in Copper Bend. It was Kincaid. Ask him who ran into that fire, not away from it." The blacksmith shuffled, his face red with shame. She is right. Marshal, Kincaid said it to distract us, to turn us into a lynch mob. And that man, Taza, he ran into the warehouse while it was falling in. He saved the Miller kids, my neighbors. He saved 2 white children from a fire Pike's man set." The crowd of townspeople voiced their agreement. "It is the God's truth. He saved them. He saved us all from that dynamite." Clara Boone stepped forward, standing beside Evelyn. "Marshal Harrison, that warrant is fraudulent. It was issued after I had already left Copper Bend with the proof. It was nothing but an act of retaliation from a guilty man, designed to silence the key witness." Harrison looked from Clara to the crowd, then to the younger deputy marshal at his side, the man who had ridden with him from Fort Verde. Deputy Marshal Reed, a young man with honest, tired eyes, spoke up. "Sir," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Clara Boone, she is my wife's sister. I have known her for 10 years. If she says the warrant is a lie, and the whole town backs her, then it is a lie. This man's testimony," he nodded at Taza, "is vital. We need him as a witness, not a prisoner." Harrison held Taza's gaze for a long moment. He saw the deep, bleeding wound in his shoulder. He saw the exhaustion. He saw the unbroken pride. He saw the way Evelyn stood beside him, ready to fight the entire United States Army for him. The marshal made his decision. "The warrant is noted," Harrison said, his voice loud and official. "And so is the sworn testimony of these citizens. I am hereby staying the warrant, pending a full investigation into its fraudulent nature. This man, Taza, is a material witness. He is not to be harmed. He is." Harrison paused. "In your protective custody, Miss Hartley. See that he does not leave. And, Sergeant, have our surgeon look at that arm. I want him alive to testify." The collective breath of the crowd was released. Evelyn's knees almost buckled with relief. She leaned against Taza, and his good arm came around her, holding her up. He was safe. For now, he was safe. The scene began to change. The fire was being fought. The wounded, including Mrs. Miller and Silas Pike, were being loaded onto a wagon for the hard ride back to the fort. Kincaid, in chains, was thrown onto a horse, his face a mask of black, defeated hatred. The blacksmith and the rancher approached Marshal Harrison, holding a piece of paper. It was the petition from town, now signed by nearly 40 men. "Marshal," the blacksmith said, We do not want this railroad. Not like this. Not if it's built on lies and killing our own. We, the citizens of Copper Bend, petition the territorial government to reject Pike's route. This valley, it should be left alone. Harrison took the petition. He read the names. "This," he said, his voice heavy, "will hold significant weight in Santa Fe. I will deliver it myself. You have my word." True justice, it seemed, did not come from a single ledger. It came from the voices of the people, finally willing to speak. As the chaos subsided, Taza and Evelyn stood near the bridge, a small, quiet island in the middle of the aftermath. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a deep, profound ache of the body and of the soul. He was leaning on her, his strength failing. He looked at her, his dark eyes softer than she had ever seen them, full of an emotion he was still learning to name. His good hand, his right hand, came up. It was caked in dirt and his own dried blood. He did not touch her face. His fingers gently touched the osprey bone at her throat. "At my cabin," he whispered, his voice so low only she could hear. "You asked what this meant. Freedom to see through the storm." He looked at the burning train, at the soldiers, at Clara and the marshal. I only ever saw the storm. Evelyn, I only ever knew how to fight, how to hide. You—" His fingers tightened on the small charm. "You taught me to see what comes after. You taught me to believe, to trust in a tomorrow." "We found it, Taza," she whispered back, her own hand coming up to cover his, pressing it against her heart. "We found it together." A new shadow fell over them. It was the Apache elder, the old man Ayanna had summoned. He was tall, his face a beautiful map of wrinkles and wisdom. He looked at Taza, and his eyes were not hostile. They were full of a deep, measuring respect. He spoke in Apache, his voice formal. "You have done a great thing, son of my sister. You walked in two worlds and did not betray either. You used the white man's law to protect our land, our people. We are caught. We need a bridge. We need a voice that both sides will listen to. We ask you, Taza, to be that voice." Taza was stunned. It was not a request. It was an anointing. It was the acceptance, the home he had been denied his entire life. The elder then turned his gaze to Evelyn. He waited, then spoke in slow, careful English. "You, the teacher woman, you speak with a straight tongue. You are not like the others who come with their Bibles and their chains. Our children, they must learn the white man's words. They must learn to read his laws so they can fight him with paper. Not just arrows, but they must not forget our ways." He paused, his gaze intense. "We ask you to stay, to build a school, a free school, here, on our land. Will you teach our children?" Evelyn's heart felt full to bursting. She looked at Taza, and his eyes were shining, a fierce pride in them. She turned back to the elder. "I would be honored," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "But there must be conditions." She looked at Marshal Harrison, who had walked over, listening. She wanted the law to hear this promise. "There will be no forced boarding," she said, her voice like steel. "The children will stay with their families. The school will be bilingual. We will teach English, and we will honor and teach the Apache language. And this valley." Her gaze swept over the scarred land. "Crow's Pass, it must be protected. No railroad, no mines. It must be declared sacred ground, forever." The elder nodded. A slow, profound agreement. It is a good promise. Marshal Harrison looked at the petition in his hand, at the chained prisoners, at the fiery ruin of Pike's greed. "Ma'am," he said, with a tired, respectful sigh, "given the crimes committed here today, and the witnesses I have, I think those are conditions the territory will be forced to accept." Far away, in the quiet, dusty office of the Territorial Gazette, Clara Boone worked with a furious, righteous energy. She pulled out the largest type she had. She set the letters, her hands black with ink. She pulled the first copy from her press. The headline was not just large. It was a broadside, an accusation, a declaration of war. It stretched the full width of the page. Simple, brutal, and true. Pike's empire of lies, bribery, terror, and the Battle of Crow's Pass. She stacked the papers. The next wagon, the next train, the next pony rider would carry them. The wave of truth they had started at the notice board had just become a flood, and it was about to wash the entire territory clean. The trial in Santa Fe was not a trial at all. It was a reckoning. Clara Boone's blistering front-page article, backed by Marshal Harrison's official report, Evelyn's meticulous ledger, and Ayanna's damning photograph had already convicted Silas Pike in the court of public opinion. The territorial governor, facing pressure from Washington and outrage from his own citizens, demanded a swift resolution. Silas Pike, his face a ruined, scarred mask, his arm amputated below the elbow, tried to use his wealth. He hired lawyers from back east, men in silk suits who spoke of progress and manifest destiny. But the evidence was too heavy. The ledger was irrefutable. The petition from the citizens of Copper Bend was read aloud, and the star witness, Bram Kincaid, saw no future in loyalty. Facing a lifetime in the Yuma prison for the shooting of Mrs. Miller, Kincaid confessed. He laid bare the entire network of corruption, naming every judge, every land agent, every Army supply officer who had taken Pike's money. He spoke for 2 full days. It was a brutal, meticulous, and vengeful confession. The last act of a man who knew he was damned and wanted to take the whole system down with him. Silas Pike was convicted. He was sentenced to 20 years hard labor. His railroad charter was revoked. His assets, including the silver mine he had murdered for, were seized by the federal government. He was broken. The day after the sentencing, Taza stood before Marshal Harrison in a small, quiet office. His arm was in a sling, the wound healing cleanly thanks to Ayanna's care. Evelyn stood beside him, her hand never leaving his. "The warrant for your arrest," Harrison said, shuffling papers, "has been officially dismissed by the governor himself. The testimony from Copper Bend, and your actions at the train. It says here your warrant is expunged in light of heroic actions in the protection of federal property and civilian lives." The marshal looked up, a small, tired smile on his face. "It also seems," he said, pulling another paper, "that Silas Pike's original $500 bounty was never officially canceled. It is, technically, still active, and since you are the man who stopped him, you are entitled to it." Taza looked at the paper, at the official seal, $500. It was a fortune. It was more money than he had ever seen. He could rebuild his cabin, buy a herd of cattle, live in comfort. He thought of the children in Copper Bend. He thought of the new school. He thought of the Apache families, driven from their lands, who had nothing. "No," Taza said, his voice quiet. He gently pushed the paper back across the desk. "I do not want his money. It is blood money." Harrison nodded, as if he had expected this. "What will you do with it, then?" "Give it to the town." Taza said, "Give it to Copper Bend. They have a warehouse to rebuild. And give it to Ayanna, my sister. She is a healer. She will know who needs it most." They returned to Copper Bend not as fugitives, but as founders. The town was different. The red and gold railroad flags were gone. The mood was somber, poorer, but cleaner. The citizens had looked into the ugly, corrupt face of Pike's progress and had chosen something else. The burned-out shell of the warehouse was a black, smoking hole in the center of town. But the day they returned, the blacksmith, his ribs still taped, was there. He was standing with the rancher, Reverend Jonas, and a dozen other men. They were not waiting for the railroad to rebuild. They were unloading their own wagons, filled with fresh-cut pine, donated from their own lands. "We heard you gave the reward money," the blacksmith said, nodding to Taza. He seemed embarrassed, humbled. "We figured, if an Apache can give his reward to this town, we can give our time." Taza, his arm still in the sling, picked up a hammer with his good right hand. He looked at the man. "You will need the help," he said, and he began to work, his hammer striking the first nail, setting a new, steady rhythm for the town's future. They worked side by side, miner, rancher, and Apache. And this time, they were building something that belonged to all of them. They made a special point, with Taza's guidance, to set aside the best lumber and supplies for the families, both white and Apache, who had lost their homes in the fires Pike and Kincaid had set. While the men rebuilt the town's body, Evelyn began to heal its heart. The elders had given her a small, sturdy log house, one that had been used for storage, set in a grove of cottonwoods by the clear running stream that divided the valley from the town. It was halfway between both worlds. She opened her school. On the first day, 5 Apache children came, quiet and watchful, their eyes wide. 3 white children from Copper Bend came as well, sent by the blacksmith and the rancher, their faces scrubbed clean. They were shy, suspicious, and sat on opposite sides of the small room. Evelyn did not begin with a lesson on letters. She took them outside. She walked them down to the stream. She had Taza and Ayana with her. Taza showed them how to read the tracks in the mud, how to tell a coyote from a stray dog. Ayana showed them the willow tree, how its bark could be chewed to stop a fever. Evelyn showed them how to write the word willow in the wet sand with a stick. They learned to read from the land, not just from a book. They learned the Apache words for the plants and the English words for the tools. They learned civics, not from a dry text, but from the story of the ledger, of how a single, brave voice, holding the truth, could bring down an empire. They sat around a single, rough-hewn table, and they learned to share. Taza's recovery was slow, but his purpose was strong. He could no longer hunt as he had. He could not draw a bow, and his left arm would never again have the strength to aim a rifle. But his spirit, the part of him that had been so wounded and isolated, was healing. One morning, Evelyn woke to the sound of thunder, but the sky was clear. She went to the door of their small cabin, on the mesa where she had lit the fire. They had returned. The mustangs. The blue roan stallion was there, his herd grazing peacefully, a living, breathing symbol of the freedom they had fought for. Taza went to the elders. He went to the town council. He spoke of the horses. They were not a resource to be hunted. They were a gift. Together, they formed a new plan. With his deep knowledge, Taza, along with Grey Wolf and the other young warriors, began to manage the herd. They did not break the horses' spirits in the white man's way, with ropes and spurs. They gentled them. Using the patient, quiet methods of the Apache, they took only a few, the strongest, leaving the herd wild and free. They created a horse fund. The gentled mustangs were not sold. They were given. The first was given to the Miller family, who had lost their wagon in the fire. The next was given to an old Apache woman whose family needed to travel to the reservation. The horses became a new currency, a currency of grace, mobility, and shared wealth. Taza, the man who had lived between worlds, was now the bridge that connected them, using the very symbol of his own wildness to tie the communities together. The autumn came, turning the cottonwoods to a brilliant, burning gold. The air was crisp and clean. One afternoon, Ayana came to their cabin. She was not carrying her medicine bag. She held only a small, simple strip of red cloth. She said nothing. She led them from the cabin, away from the town, away from the camp, to the bank of the quiet stream. She led them to the spot where Evelyn had first written Taza's name in the sand. She had them stand, facing each other. The only sound was the clear, cold water running over the stones. "My brother," Ayana said, her voice soft. "You were a man of the rock, hard and alone. You have learned to be a man of the water, to flow, to give life." She turned to Evelyn. "My sister," she said, her eyes warm. "You were a leaf in the wind, frightened and lost. You have learned to be the tree, to stand, to offer shade, to hold the ground." She took Taza's good right hand. She took Evelyn's left hand. She laid them one over the other. She took the strip of red cloth, the color of the earth, the color of the heart, and she wrapped it around both of their wrists, binding them together. She did not tie a knot. She simply tucked the ends, a bond of trust, not force. "In our way," she said, "there are no promises of forever. There are no chains of gold. There is only today. There is only the choice to stand together, to share breath, to hold the same line. You are bound. You are one." Taza looked at Evelyn. His eyes, once so hard and watchful, were now open and full of a deep, quiet love. He leaned in, and he kissed her, not with the desperation of the cave, but with the calm, sure promise of the hearth. That evening, a rider brought the mail. There was a letter for them. From Santa Fe. It was from Clara Boone. Her article, the one with Ayana's photograph, had won the Territorial Press Award. It had been reprinted in papers as far east as Chicago, but that was not the important news. "The public outcry," she wrote, "has been enormous. The legal fund we established for the sacred lands has grown. With the testimony from the trial, the governor had no choice. He has signed the order. Crow's Pass and the entire valley is officially declared Apache-protected land. In perpetuity, it is safe. You won." Evelyn read the letter aloud, her voice thick with tears. Taza stood at the open door, his good arm around her, and looked out at the valley. Now theirs, now safe. Later that night, long after Taza was asleep, Evelyn sat by the small, glowing hearth. The ledger, its purpose served, was now just a book, but there was one last piece of the past to settle. She found a small, locked wooden box, the only thing she owned from her life in Silas Pike's house. Inside, there was a single, folded letter. It was the last letter her mother had written her, full of instructions on how to be grateful, how to be useful, how to serve Mr. Pike and be invisible. For years, Evelyn had clung to it, a reminder of her shame, her cowardice, her debt. She took a piece of paper and her pen by the firelight. She wrote a new letter. It was not to her mother. It was not to Silas. It was to herself. "I forgive you," she wrote. "I forgive you for being silent. I forgive you for being afraid. You were a child. You did what you had to do to survive. You have paid your debt. You are home now. She folded the new letter. She then took her mother's old, brittle letter and unfolded it one last time. She read the familiar, painful words. Then she slowly, deliberately placed it in the fire. She watched the edges curl, the ink turn brown, the words of her old life turning to black, weightless ash, the shame, the guilt, the long, cold shadow of that house. It all lifted, rising with the smoke, and disappeared into the night. She was free. She went to Taza, sliding into the warmth of their bed. He stirred, his good arm finding her, pulling her close. "Is it done?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "It is done," she whispered, her heart finally, completely, at peace. She listened to the wind outside, a low, gentle sound, no longer a shriek. "Taza," she whispered.
What if another storm comes? A different one. He was quiet for a moment. She felt him smile in the darkness. "Then we will do what we did before," he whispered, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "We will hide. We will hide behind the mustangs, and we will hide behind the kitchen fire. We will be safe." She burrowed closer, her head on his uninjured shoulder. She fell asleep. Outside, the last embers of the Pike's warehouse died. The town was quiet in the high, dark valley. The moon rose, silvering the tops of the pine trees. A distant, clear sound echoed off the rocks. It was the blue roan stallion, calling to his herd. Freedom was still there. It was still breathing. And for the first time in this small cabin, it had a home. 1 year passed, the seasons turned, washing the soot from Copper Bend and the blood from Crow's Pass. The railroad, facing federal lawsuits and a ruined reputation from Clara Boone's relentless articles, had officially abandoned its claim. The territorial government, acting on the wave of public opinion and the stark evidence of the trial that had convicted Silas Pike, had rerouted the main line 30 miles south. It was a longer, more expensive path for them, but it was a profound victory for the valley. Where Pike's surveyors had hammered their first stakes, there now stood a simple, tall marker, carved from ponderosa pine by Taza's good hand. It had words in English and symbols in Apache. It read, "Crow's Pass, Sacred Land, by order of the territory." It was a promise carved in wood, a line drawn against the greed of the world. Evelyn's school. The small cabin by the stream was the heart of this new promise. The children called her Teacher of Two Skies, the one who taught the words of the white world under the wisdom of the Apache sky. Her classroom was loud. The children sat together, Apache and white, their old suspicions replaced by the shared frustration of long division and the shared joy of a new story. She taught them English. Yes, but she also taught them the names of the plants Ayanna brought, and Ayanna taught them the stories that went with the roots. Evelyn, in turn, spent her afternoons with Ayanna, her old ledger now filled not with bribes, but with meticulous drawings of high desert flora, preserving the medical knowledge that had been passed down for generations. Taza found his own peace, not in isolation, but in connection. His left arm never fully recovered. It was strong enough to hold reins, to steady a piece of wood, but it would never again draw a bowstring or hold a rifle steady for a long shot. He did not mourn the loss. His new strength was not in his ability to hunt alone, but in his ability to provide. He became a legal guide, the only one trusted by both the Army and the Apache. He and the blacksmith from town built a new trading post, a solid, honest building where prices were fair, where a bushel of corn traded for a good blanket, and where no one was ever sold whiskey. His greatest joy, however, was with the mustangs. He and Grey Wolf managed the herd, their horse fund becoming the bank of the valley. The future was not a guarantee. It was a promise, one they would have to keep every day. The scholarship fund, born from the legal, papered sale of the mustangs, had just sent its first student, the blacksmith's daughter, to the women's college back east, Clara Boone. Her pen, now one of the most feared and respected in the territory, had just begun a new, quiet investigation into the land rights of other tribes, using Evelyn's ledger as her blueprint. The school and the horses were not the only new life in the valley. 6 months after the fire, a small, coughing boy had been left at Ayanna's camp. He was Apache, his parents taken by the lung fever that had swept the reservation. He was 3 years old, small for his age, and possessed a pair of dark, watchful eyes that missed nothing. He was Taza, in miniature. Ayanna had healed his lungs. But it was Evelyn who had healed his silence. He had not spoken for a month. Then, one day, watching Taza gentle a young colt, the boy had pointed at the hawk feather Taza wore in his hair and whispered his first word, Hawk. The community, in its wisdom, had named him. He was Little Hawk. He was not theirs, not by blood. He belonged to the valley. But at night, it was Evelyn who read him stories, and it was Taza who carried him on his good shoulder.
He was the future they had fought for, a child of two worlds who would grow up knowing he belonged to both. The peace was real, but the world did not forget them. One afternoon in late summer, a new delegation arrived. They were not railroad men. They were smoother, dressed in finer suits from Chicago. They represented a new mining conglomerate. They came with papers, surveyors, and offers of money. They wanted to buy the valley, legally this time. They set up a meeting, not with the elders, but with the new town council of Copper Bend. They offered to build a new church, a new saloon, to pave the street. They offered Taza, as the community's guide, a sum of $5,000, just for his signature. The meeting was held in the new town hall, the rebuilt warehouse. The entire town was there, along with the Apache elders. The businessman, a Mr. Davies, spoke for an hour. He spoke of jobs, of wealth, of progress. When he was finished, he laid the contract on the table. No one moved. Then Reverend Jonas stood up. He was no longer the trembling, frightened man from the church. "Mr. Davies," Jonas said, his voice clear, "your money is not welcome here. We have seen what that kind of progress looks like. It looks like a burning warehouse and a woman shot in the street. We choose differently." The blacksmith stood next. "We built this hall with our own hands. It is not for sale." The businessman looked to Taza, his last hope. "Mr. Taza, $5,000. A fortune. Surely you see the wisdom." Taza did not look at the man. He looked at Evelyn, who stood in the back, holding Little Hawk's hand. He thought of the ledger, of the lies. He looked at the elders. He stood. "You are not talking to me," Taza said, his voice quiet, but filling the room. "You are talking to the wrong people." He gestured to the elders. "This is their land. It is not for sale." "We have legal papers," Davies blustered, his face turning red. "And we," a new voice said, "have a press." Clara Boone, who had ridden up from Santa Fe just for this, stood, her notepad in hand. "My associate already has a telegraph wire ready. The headline will read, 'Chicago Mining Attempts to Swindle Apache Nation. Again.' How do you think your investors will feel about that? Mr. Davies." Davies's face went pale. He saw the law, the press, the united town, the silent, watchful Apache. He looked up at the ridge. The blue-roan stallion and its herd were standing there, as if Taza himself had summoned them. A silent, powerful no against the skyline. The delegation was gone by sunset. The valley had held. That spring marked the first graduation from Evelyn's school. The oldest children, now proficient in English and proud of their own language, were moving on. There was a small ceremony by the stream. Evelyn, her heart full, stood before them. She took off the osprey bone Ayanna had given her, the charm she had worn through the fire and the fight. She placed it around the neck of the eldest girl, the blacksmith's daughter. "This is not to remind you to breathe," Evelyn said, her voice thick. "It is to remind you to speak, even when your voice shakes. See the storm, and then speak the truth." That night, Taza sat by the fire. He was carving a new handle for his old skinning knife. He worked slowly, his left hand holding the wood steady, his right hand doing the delicate work. He was not carving a hawk. He was carving a horse, its head high, its mane flowing. He was carving the shape of freedom. When he was finished, he polished the wood. He slid the heavy, deadly blade back into the sheath, but the handle was a promise. He would give it to Little Hawk. When the boy was old enough, he would teach him that a knife was a tool, for building and for provision, not just a weapon for fighting. Evelyn came and sat beside him, leaning her head on his good shoulder. They watched the fire. Little Hawk was asleep on his cot, his breathing deep and even. "It is a good life, Taza," she whispered. He nodded, his good arm coming around her. It is a good life. He looked at the sturdy log walls of their home, at the food on the shelf, at the child in the cot. Home, he said, his voice a low rumble, testing the words he had learned, is not a roof, it is a promise, one that is kept. The sun was setting, painting the high cliffs in strokes of rose gold and deep purple. Ayana was watching Little Hawk. Taza and Evelyn had this moment, just for them. He swung up onto his strongest pony, his good hand taking the reins. He held his hand down, and Evelyn took it, mounting fluidly, settling behind him on the saddle. She wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against the solid, warm strength of his back. They rode as one, up the familiar trail, toward the high ridge. The valley spread out below them, a quilt of green fields, the silver thread of the stream, and the warm, golden lights of the cabins. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and the faint, sweet smell of wood smoke, the sound of children's laughter, and the distant, contented call of the horses drifted up from below. They stopped at the overlook, the same one where he had once stood, a man belonging to nowhere. He was no longer alone. She held him tighter. She thought of the woman who had collapsed at his door, starving, freezing, and utterly broken. She remembered the safety of his arms, the warmth of his fire. He had given her a home. Now, she was giving him one back. She leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to his shoulder, just above the healed scar. "Taza," she whispered, her voice full of a peace so deep it felt as old as the mountains. "We're home now." Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please leave a comment below to connect with us and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel Wild West Tales. Give this video a like, and support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by many more.